Chapter 882. Please go to ******* read latest chapter / she said, in fact, it's not a good idea. The mystical silver fox is in the purple gold luo pan. We can't go in for a while and she can't come out for a while. So I think you might as well take advantage of this period of time to quickly increase your spiritual power cultivation. It's best to find your own wisdom king's Dharmakaya, so that you can fight with the mystical silver fox fair and square. Even if it's one-on-one, you won't be at a disadvantage. And if we go in with you at this time, the mystical silver fox will definitely be defeated. Li Yunyang asked curiously, Wisdom King's Dharmakaya? Then where is my Wisdom King Dharmakaya? Ziyuan hesitated for a moment and said, the immovable Wisdom King is the head of the 5 Wisdom Kings of the esoteric sect. If you want to find your Wisdom King's Dharmakaya, you must look for it in the esoteric sect's cultivation place. Li Yunyang frowned slightly and said, look for it in the cultivation place of the esoteric sect? However, the esoteric sect of the Chinese cultivation world had already moved eastward to Japan during the Tang dynasty. Now, the esoteric sect is referring to the Tibetan esoteric sect. Could it be that my Dharmakaya of the Wisdom King is in Tibet? No way. Why didn't Master Erdini tell me when I went to Tibet last time? Ziyuan shook her head and said, all the gods in the world have a habit, that is, they tend to favor places with devout believers and strong incense. Only in these places can there be many miracles. At this moment, Lin Miao let out a soft cry and said, no wonder I heard that people fight for their dignity and Buddhas fight for their incense. So this is the reason? Li Yunyang looked at her with a smile and nodded approvingly. That's right. Don't think that the gods are indifferent to fame and fortune. In fact, the gods also fight very fiercely in the sky. There are many stories of gods fighting with each other in your Western mythology, aren't there? Lin Miao said seriously, Master, now there is only Lin Miao from the east, there is no Chris from the west. Li Yundong chuckled. Well, it's my fault. However, there are many things worth learning from Westernization. We shouldn't blindly reject it. We should take its essence. Lin Miao said seriously, Master, I think that if you really want to cultivate, you have to give up everything in the past. Forget your race, skin, and nationality. Only then can you truly integrate into this environment. Otherwise, you might just be a layman walking around outside for the rest of your life. As she said this, she looked at Li Yundong with great admiration and said very sincerely, I hope that one day in my life, even if it's just an hour or a minute, I can experience the highest realm of cultivation that my master once experienced. I want to know what it feels like and what it tastes like. Li Yundong disagreed with Lin Miao's previous words. He had always disagreed with the idea and practice of neither left nor right, neither east nor west. For example, in order to smash the decadent feudal dynasty in the past, people had completely destroyed everything in the feudal society. Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism had been completely destroyed at that time, especially Confucianism. People had abandoned Confucianism like a pair of worn-out shoes and smashed it with contempt. However, Southeast Asian countries such as Vietnam regarded it as a treasure. Now, they were still based on Confucianism, and Confucius statues could be seen everywhere in universities. This kind of black and white thinking was very active. Li Yundong didn't appreciate it, but he also knew that Lin Miao's diligent and devout cultivation heart was quite rare. He shouldn't destroy her enthusiasm, so he just smiled and nodded at her to show his approval. Then Li Yundong turned his head and said to Ziyuan, just now, according to what you said, isn't the most popular place in the world the Shingon Tantrism in Mount Koya in Japan? If it were more than 1,000 years ago, Japan would not be ranked even if they queued 800 times. At that time, the Tang dynasty was the most prosperous place in the world for Tantrism. Even India, the motherland of Buddhism, could not compare with China. But now, there were nearly 100 million Buddhists in Japan. Although India and other countries also believed in Buddhism, there were probably hundreds of millions of Buddhists. However, there were too many Buddhist schools in India and there were also many gods. On weekdays when Hindus went to the toilet, there were many special toilet gods and Buddhas. If they worshipped the gods and Buddhas in front of the toilet one by one before entering, they would probably wet their pants several times. It could be seen that there were as many gods and Buddhas in this country as there were people in India. If there were too many gods, the incense would be easily dispersed. What's more, once there were too many schools, the attacks between them would be very fierce. The gods between schools were different. The gods believed in one school were not believed in another school. Therefore, the believers were clearly divided. Those who believed in one school would definitely not believe in the gods of another school. Therefore, although the immovable Wisdom King had a high status, he could not resist the gods and there were too many temples. He could only watch helplessly as his incense was divided by the gods and Buddhas everywhere. However, Buddhism in Japan was different. Although there were different schools in this country because of the sensitive relationship between Shintoism and Buddhism in this country, many believers of Buddhism were also believers of Shintoism. Similarly, when they believed in Amaterasu at the same time, they did not exclude the gods and Buddhas of other schools. The Japanese people advocated martial arts, and their respect for the immovable wisdom king had almost become a special culture. It could even be said that almost all Buddhists in Japan highly respected and believed in the immovable wisdom king, not only the Shingon Tantrism. Therefore, according to Ziyuan, the immovable wisdom king's Dharmakaya could only be in the Shingon Tantrism, because Mount Koya of the Shingon Tantrism was the exclusive Taoist field of the immovable wisdom king. Seeing Li Yundong ask her, Ziyuan said cautiously, "I'm just speculating. I'm not completely sure. I'm afraid I'll have to go to Mount Koya to know whether it's true or not." Li Yundong couldn't help frowning when he heard this. "I just came back from Japan and now I'm going there again? No way." Ziyuan pursed her lips and smiled. "Now that your yang spirit comes and goes, you can fly several times a day. Is there any difficulty?" However, Li Yundong shook his head and said, "The Japanese cultivation world has suffered heavy losses in this war. People like me who don't like little Japan feel miserable when I see it. I'm afraid that they are doing a big thing at this time, and they may be saying bad things about me behind my back. If I go, it won't be a good thing." At this time, Zhou Qin couldn't help but sneer and say, "How dare they? Don't they see if they can survive without master?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "You can't say that. In this world, only kindness that doesn't ask for anything in return is true kindness. Sometimes, not only will you not get anything in return but you may even have an enemy." Ruan Hongling, who had been silent all this time, couldn't help but ask curiously, "What's the meaning of this?" She was straightforward and shallow, so she couldn't understand the truth of these words. However, after hearing this, Zhou Qin was stunned. Her eyes flashed and she seemed to be thinking about something. Li Yundong smiled and said to Ruan Hongling, "When you grow up a little more you will understand." As he said this, he said to Ziyuan, "Let's put this matter aside for now. At least wait until Suchan wakes up. In addition, we should find a way to find Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong in the next few days. The two of them are fox demons. I'm afraid that if they wander outside they will cause a lot of trouble." Ziyuan nodded, but Zhou Qin quickly said, "Master, do you think they went to find Lu Yi?" On the way back, Li Yundong had also told Zhou Qin and the others about his doubts about whether Lu Yi was dead or not. At this time, when Zhou Qin said this, he suddenly thought of this and said, "It's very possible." Zhou Qin was greatly encouraged and said, "Master, where do you think they will go to find him?" Li Yundong, Zhou Qin and Ziyuan looked at each other, and the three of them said in unison, "Mount Tianlong." After the three of them finished speaking, they looked at each other and smiled. After thinking for a moment, Li Yundong said, "Well, I'll go to Mount Tianlong. You guys stay at home." Zhou Qin volunteered and said, "Master, I'll go with you." At this time, Lin Miao also said, "Master, there shouldn't be any danger this time. Can you take me to have a look?" Seeing the anticipation on their faces, Li Yundong nodded and smiled helplessly at Ziyuan. "I'm sorry to trouble you to look after the house." Ziyuan also smiled and said, "It's okay. Now the mystical silver fox has been locked in the purple gold luo disc. If there are no outsiders, she won't be able to get out in a short time." As soon as he said this, Li Yundong suddenly thought of something and immediately said, "You reminded me. No, I have to carry this purple gold luo disc with me. I can't leave it with you. Otherwise it will hurt you." Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, "Take it. I don't dare to take it even if you give it to me. Otherwise, what if the mystical silver fox suddenly runs out when you are not here?" Although this was a joke, Li Yundong was shocked when he heard it. He said, "It's okay if you don't say it. I also feel a little scared when you say it. Forget it, you can go with us. Otherwise, when Suchan wakes up, we can go together. That's okay, isn't it?" Li Yundong was now at the highest realm of the Thunder Retribution, only one step away from the first heaven. Suchan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin were all masters of the Thunder Retribution realm. If the four of them worked together, although the world was big, they could really go anywhere. Even if it was a dragon's pool or a tiger's cave, they would still have the strength to break through. Just as Li Yundong and the others were about to return to Mount Tianlong in distant Japan, although a fierce battle in the cultivation world had ended, a huge earthquake caused by this fierce battle swept over quickly, shaking the entire Japanese cultivation world and even the whole country. Don't worry that this book will end immediately. There is still a very interesting story to follow / uploaded by bookfriends / Chapter 883. Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. In the Okinawan, which was full of trees and tombstones, a beautiful woman in a plain kimono was kneeling on the tatame. She was wearing a pair of white cotton socks, her back was straight, her head was coiled high, and her hair was combed into a noble bun. Although her whole body was very simple, her whole temperament seemed noble and extraordinary. This person was Masako Tachibana, the former patriarch of the Tachibana family, who had once dominated Japan and was invincible. Masako Tachibana was defeated by Li Yundong at the peak of the cultivation world and fell from the Mount Tianwang. After a short period of pain and torture, she gradually learned from the pain and walked out of the shadow of failure. At this time she had shed all her glory. Although she was bare-faced and did not have the dignity of the past, she had a different kind of charm. Masako Tachibana was kneeling in a small courtyard of the Okinawan. There was a tea table in front of her. While making tea and pouring tea for herself, she was watching the picture on the TV not far away and listening to the sound coming from it. At this time, the TV was playing the TV news of the Takagi Prefecture TV station with the icon GY. In it, a beautiful but tired female host was saying very quickly and clearly, "Yesterday at about 11 o'clock in the morning, there was another strong earthquake in Japan, with Nazuno in Takagi Prefecture as the epicenter. The surrounding places such as Fujiwara Town, Nishinosuno Town, and Kurishin Village all had obvious tremors. According to the preliminary estimate of the Earthquake Monitoring Center, the intensity of this earthquake is about 6. The surrounding cities are not very seriously affected, but because Nazuno is now in a state of high alert, it is strange that the area near the epicenter has been closed by the local police and self-defense forces." At this time, the host in the TV was standing on a mountain and pointing to the location of the Killing Stone scenic area. She said in a suspicious and exaggerated tone, "When I arrived here, I found that there were many monks and Shintoist priests, sorcerers, goddesses and witches here. At this time they were setting up Taoist rites in the west and west of the epicenter and offering sacrifices to the dead. What is incomprehensible is that in this earthquake, many monks and cultivators of the Shintoism sect died." Of course, that's not the most incredible thing. The most incredible thing is that we can actually see all the major sects of Shintoism gathered here. How rare. Nothing like this has ever happened before. What kind of matter could make so many sects gather together? As she said that, the host suddenly pressed her hand against the headset in her ear, as if she had heard the instructions and words from the director. She listened to the words in the headset while nodding. After a while she continued, "We just received news that the residents nearby have seen many incredible phenomena. These phenomena occurred at the same time as the earthquake, which is very surprising. Now our staff has found a resident nearby and asked us to ask her what happened here." At this time she took a few quick steps and the camera followed her figure. She came to an old woman with wrinkles all over her face. The female reporter bowed and said loudly, "Oh, I'm sorry to disturb you." The old Nai also bowed in return and put his palms together. "You're welcome." The female reporter asked curiously, "Old Nai, are you a Buddhist?" The old Nai laughed and said, "Yes, I've been a vegetarian for 60 years. The female reporter said with an exaggerated expression, "Wow, you're really a devout Buddhist. By the way, during the earthquake yesterday I heard that something very strange happened here. Did you see it, old Nai?" The old Nai's expression suddenly became very rich, and he said in an exaggerated tone, "Oh, you're talking about this. I saw it with my own eyes." The female reporter hurriedly asked, "What happened?" The old Nai pointed in the direction of the Stone of Slaughter scenic area and the continuous mountain range and said, "When the earthquake happened yesterday, there were rolling thunderclouds everywhere in the sky at the beginning. The thunder was so loud that it sounded like the end of the earth was coming. It was really scary. All the residents nearby ran away and didn't dare to stay at home. I really couldn't walk, so I didn't leave. But then I saw the sky was full of colorful lights and there were a lot of people flying around in the air." As he said that, the old Nai's expression suddenly became very mysterious. "Do you know what else I saw?" The female reporter was listening with great interest at first, but when she heard that there were a lot of people flying around in the air, her expression became very interesting. She already felt that the old man was very unreliable, but she still asked, "What did you see?" The old Nai suddenly waved his hands vigorously. "It's the nine-tailed celestial fox, it's the Yumai. I saw the Yumai that was released from the Stone of Slaughter." The female reporter didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Although she was also a follower of the Ise Shinto of Shintoism, the degree of her faith was very shallow. She only went to worship during festivals, and it was absolutely not the word devout. Moreover, she was born in a good family and received a good Western education. Naturally, she wouldn't believe in such outrageous things. If it wasn't for politeness and professionalism, she was afraid that she would have asked the old man, "Are you a shill for the stone of slaughter?" and so on. At this time the old Nai's emotions were stirred up, and he couldn't control himself. He danced on the spot like a witch and muttered some incantations. But after all, he was old. After tossing and turning for a while, his body slanted and he fell to the side, scaring the female reporter to the side. She immediately supported the old Nai and shouted loudly, "Help, help!" Previously, in order to get the camera position and angle, the place she was at was rather remote. When she shouted, no one responded to her. When the female reporter was busy, she saw a figure flash in the mountains. She immediately shouted, "Is there someone there? Come help, there's someone here who can't hold on any longer." At this time, the figure hesitated and then walked out from the forest. It was a young woman with a graceful figure. Her head was lowered, and she looked somewhat flustered and hesitant not far away. When she saw the camera, she didn't want to come over. When the female reporter saw this, she became anxious and shouted loudly at the woman, "What are you doing there? Come quickly." At this time, the woman seemed to have made up her mind. She covered her face and ran over. The female reporter didn't pay attention to her, but the cameraman was curious and stared at the woman with the camera. The two of them hurriedly stuffed a purse into the old man's mouth. Only then did they heave a sigh of relief. The female reporter raised her eyes and carefully looked at the woman in front of her. Out of habit, she asked, "Do you live nearby? Did you see anything strange yesterday?" She rambled on, but the woman didn't seem to understand. She waved her hand and turned to leave, still covering her face with her hand. At this time, the female reporter came to her senses. She felt that she looked like a star she knew, so she pointed at her and said, "Ah, you seem to be a movie star in China?" However, the woman waved her hand and didn't say a word. She quickly ran away from the TV camera with a frightened expression. The female reporter watched her go away. She wanted to chase after her, but she couldn't leave the old man beside her alone. She could only stamp her feet secretly. She could vaguely guess the woman's identity, but she didn't understand why such a popular star in China would appear in this place alone. However, she didn't know that this person was none other than Lu Fei'er. After the mystical silver fox rushed out alone, Lu Fei'er looked at the sky with fear, waiting for the result of the battle of the century. Later, she was really frightened by the scene and movement of the battle. The deafening explosion and roar made her feel as if she was on a battlefield, as if she would be involved in the disaster in the next second and be smashed to pieces. Although Lu Fei'er was afraid, she was a young woman after all, and her hands and feet were nimble. She boldly ran out and hid far away. She didn't even dare to look at the terrible battle in the sky. When the world quieted down again, she poked her head out in panic. She wanted to know the result, but she didn't dare to go back to the original hotel. She only dared to stay alone. She didn't have a phone. She stayed alone for a day with hunger and cold. After making sure that the mystical silver fox didn't appear again, and there were more and more people around, she boldly walked out. However, she didn't expect that she would encounter such a thing as soon as she escaped. Her identity was sensitive, and if she was caught, it would definitely be a piece of gossip. Who knew how it would be made up, so naturally she ran as fast as she could. At this time, the female reporter's eyes in the TV camera were drawn back from Lu Fei'er, who had gone far away. The female reporter continued to go deep into the scene of the Killing Stone scenic spot with the cameraman. While filming the scene of the destruction caused by the battle, she did the interview. Masako Tachibana, who was next to the TV, was silent for a while, and there was no expression on her face. After a while, the moving door of the room was gently opened, and a beautiful woman came in. It was Tsuruko Tachibana. After she opened the door, she saw her daughter at a glance. She was slightly surprised, and then she said with a smile, "Tsuruko, are you up? Are you watching the news?" "Ah, it's the news about Su Yich. Ah, so many people died at that time." Masako Tachibana turned her face slightly and sighed softly, "Yes, it's terrible. Is our Japanese cultivation world really so vulnerable? Are the Chinese cultivators really so much stronger than us?" Tsuruko Tachibana smiled slightly. After dragging his wooden clogs at the door, he moved in snow-white socks and walked to his daughter's side. Then he knelt down and said softly, "When I was the same age as you, I once thought that I was the strongest, that the sect I believed in was the strongest, and that the gods I believed in were the strongest. But when I met Wang Yuanshan, I knew that it was not like that. Tsuruko Tachibana looked at his daughter seriously and said, Tsuruko, although you have experienced this fiasco, it is not a bad thing. When I was defeated by Wang Yuanshan, I was no better than you. Failure is not terrible. What is terrible is that you do not know how to sum up the experience and lessons in the failure and catch up with the strong. Since you are so emotional today, let me take the liberty to ask you, have you learned any lessons from it? Tsuruko Tachibana's face was wooden and she did not speak for a long time. After a long time she said slowly, Mother, I want to send Tachibana Wakako to China for further cultivation. Tsuruko Tachibana immediately laughed. She knew that her daughter had realized the problem. She quickly asked, Then who do you want her to worship as a teacher? Masako Tachibana said with a solemn face, Where you fall, of course you have to get up. Of course, it is to worship Li Yundong the fighting Tianzuan as a teacher. I'm too tired. There's only one chapter tonight. I'll make up for it tomorrow morning. Chapter 884. When Tsuruko Tachibana heard what Masako Tachibana said, he smiled with relief and said, Masako, have you asked the child? Will she be willing to go? Although Masako Tachibana was a woman, she had a strong Japanese style of parental control. She never considered everything from the perspective of her children, so she didn't want to go. Yusun. Masako Tachibana said disapprovingly, she has to go whether she wants to or not. Just as Tsuruko Tachibana was about to speak, he suddenly heard a voice coming from outside. No, I don't want to go. The two of them were stunned. They looked back and saw that Tachibana Wakako was standing at the door, looking at her mother indignantly. When she saw her mother and Nai looking at her, she shouted again, I don't want to go. Then she turned around and ran away. Tsuruko Tachibana and Masako Tachibana didn't expect that Tachibana Wakako would be next to them at this time, and they happened to hear this. They looked at each other. Tsuruko Tachibana couldn't help complaining, Masako, you shouldn't force her. Masako Tachibana snorted and said stubbornly, I'm doing this for her own good. Tsuruko Tachibana sighed and said, Of course parents think so, but the child is already an adult now. She has her own ideas and we should respect her opinion. Masako Tachibana was anxious. Do you want me to worship Li Jiandong as my teacher? Tsuruko Tachibana looked at her strangely. Why not? Masako Tachibana's face darkened and she said with a long face, I can't do that. Tsuruko Tachibana said with a smile, There is no age in learning. The capable one is the teacher. It seems that although you have made progress, you still haven't seen through it. The stubborn Masako Tachibana asked, Mother, if it were you, would you like to worship Wang Yuanshan who defeated you that year as your teacher? This sentence suddenly made Tsuruko Tachibana look sad. She was silent. After a long time, she sighed and said a Chinese poem in a low voice, My heart will shine on the bright moon, but the bright moon shines on the ditch. The goddess is interested. This poem came from Daji's deep love for Jibokeo in the gods' investiture list. After being rejected by Jibokeo, she lamented. The Tachibana family was the most influential family among the 4 noble surnames in Japan. As the heir of the Tachibana family, Masako Tachibana was a noble among the nobles in Japan. People like her had been reading poetry and books since she was a child. She had learned ancient and modern knowledge, Chinese and Western knowledge, including zither, chess, calligraphy and painting, tea poetry, sword dance and so on. The Chinese found it a little difficult to read the Book of Songs, records of the Grand Historian, and other pure classical Chinese books. In their eyes, those were the classics that they had to read since they were 5 years old. They could read through them easily, and it was as easy as reading Story Club. Tsuruko Tachibana's poem was about the story that Daji had wanted the handsome and beautiful Jibokeo to be his teacher, but he had been sternly rejected. When Masako Tachibana heard this, she immediately understood the meaning of the song. She said apologetically, Mother, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to mention your sadness. Masako Tachibana knew that after her mother returned from Zhonghua University, she fell in love and didn't care about the internal affairs of the family. She threw all the heavy burdens to her. At that time she was only a teenager, but she had taken up the family's pillar and fought with others with countless methods. Other Japanese girls of her age were in the prime of their youth, enjoying themselves to their heart's content, while she had to constantly battle wits and courage with others in the cold and strict cultivation world. It was in such an environment that Masako Tachibana had honed her heart of stone. When Tsuruko Tachibana heard his daughter's apology, he shook his head slightly, put his palms together and murmured softly, I hope Amaterasu God will bless Wang Yuanshan and let him be safe. Masako Tachibana opened her mouth and thought to herself, the ninth heaven divine night thunder almost killed the mystical silver fox, let alone Wang Yuanshan? How could he still be alive? But she still held back her words and didn't say anything more. Her eyes flickered, thinking about how to make her daughter yield and finally be willing to take Li Jiandong as her teacher. Here it is, because Masako Tachibana had been the head of the family since she was a teenager, the innocence and brilliance of the girl had all been worn out in the cruel sect struggle, leaving only iron blood and coldness. At this time, after thinking about the pain and becoming a lot calmer, she still had a deep style of a parent. She absolutely could not tolerate the slightest resistance and conflict between her children and her subordinates. She had very little communication with her daughter, and she didn't know that her daughter actually admired and worshipped Li Jiandong very much. Moreover, even if Tachibana Wakako had once cried, she didn't take it seriously. If she had told her in a good voice, Tachibana Wakako would have been so excited that she would have jumped 3 feet high. Without her saying anything more, she would have agreed happily. But when Masako Tachibana said these words in such a tough manner, it immediately aroused Tachibana Wakako's disgust. Although she was usually gentle and pleasant, she was also at the age where her rebellious heart was the strongest. Hearing her mother's words, her rebellious heart rose, and she refused to do what she had been willing to do. At this time, Masako Tachibana didn't have the slightest intention of repentance. She was only thinking about how to make her daughter give in, but she didn't expect that it would cause a lot of trouble. Almost at the same time in Mount Tianlong of Dongwu City, Li Jiandong and the others revisited the old place again, but they were quite disappointed to find that there were no traces of Chao Yi Lu Yuehong and the others in the old place of the Fox Zen School. Li Jiandong pushed open the door and walked into the Taoist temple that had made him famous all over the world. He saw that there were fewer visitors in the Taoist temple because of the lack of management. Dongwu City was a famous cultural tourist city in China. The Taoist field on Mount Tianlong was not very famous. In Buddhism, there were Shiyuan Temple, which was more famous than it, the Cold Mountain Temple, which was known as the Midnight Bell to the passenger ship, and the North Temple Pagoda, which was known as the First Temple of Dongwu. In Taoism, there was the Xuanmiao Temple, which was one of the 4 famous temples in Jiangnan. These places naturally had a greater advantage than Mount Tianlong. In addition, since the 6 sects besieged the Fox Zen School, the Taoist temple of Mount Tianlong had been in a state of no management and was basically abandoned. Although there had been a lively scene of a lot of tourists for a period of time, it was in the tourist season. Now it was the off-season. The Taoist temple of Mount Tianlong was really deserted. The whole mountain was quiet and the birds were singing even louder. There was only the sound of birds singing everywhere, but there was no sound of people. This made Li Jiandong feel very emotional for a moment. He walked to the Taoist temple with the pattern of 8 diagrams in yin-yang. This was the place where he had fought against the masters of the 6 sects and defeated their plot of taking turns to fight. For a moment, Li Jiandong couldn't help thinking of the scene of the fierce fight. Now that he thought about it, although he felt that the fight at that time was a little childish, he couldn't help but feel emotional when he revisited the old place. Especially when he pushed open the door to the place where Lu Yi used to live, he saw that the desk, the chair, and even the door were covered with dust and cobwebs. There was no trace of anyone having been there. After looking around the room, Li Jiandong couldn't help but shake his head. It seems that he's not here. At this time, Ziyuan and Zhou Qin carefully looked around and nodded in agreement with Li Jiandong. Lin Miao, who had followed them, looked around curiously and asked Ruan Hongling about what had happened to Li Jiandong here from time to time in a low voice. When she woke up, she was still crying and fainting because of the bad news of Ao Wushuang. She, who was usually talkative, had become silent and ignored everyone who talked to her. Only when Li Jiandong talked to her did she hold Li Jiandong's arm tightly and cry silently. After Li Jiandong gently and carefully coaxed her for a long time, she slowly stopped crying, but she refused to let go of Li Jiandong's hand no matter what. This time, even if Li Yundong hadn't asked her to come to Dongwu City, she was afraid that she would have refused. Now in the little girl's mind, she was already alone. She had neither relatives nor a master. She only had Li Yundong to rely on. If he disappeared again, there would be no meaning in her life. Li Jiandong turned his head to look at Su Chan, only to see that she had lowered her head and her eyes were slightly red. It seemed that she had remembered the past when she had fought with her master Ao Wushuang here. For a moment she felt sad and wanted to cry again. He smiled and persuaded her, "Channer, do you still remember when we were at our poorest? We were looking through our bank books here, but we found that there was no money in them. Li Jiandong mentioned these painful past events, but looking back, it made people feel warm and interesting. Hearing his words, the little girl's attention was distracted. She remembered that she and Li Jiandong had destroyed the treasures of the Fox Zen school for thousands of years in the secret room. She was so scared that she had destroyed the corpses to get rid of the evidence. Thinking of these things, the little girl's sadness was immediately diluted a lot. The corners of her mouth curved slightly. She said softly, "Yundong, do you think they are in the secret room?" Li Jiandong was stunned and said, "It's possible." As he said this, he immediately led Su Chan and the others into the secret room through the entrance of the back mountain. But after entering the secret room, Li Jiandong still found no trace of them. There was thick dust and dense cobwebs everywhere. Li Jiandong shook his head and said, "They're not here. Since we can think of it, they can also think of it. If Lu Yi is still alive, he will definitely think of it." Su Chan thought for a moment and said, "Then, could they be in Shantang?" Although Li Jiandong didn't think that Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong would show up here, when he saw Su Chan looking up at him eagerly, he remembered the warm scene when he had reunited with her in Shantang. He wanted the little girl to not be so sad, so he said to her, "Okay, let's go and have a look." Although Li Jiandong didn't have any hope, when they arrived at Shantang, Li Jiandong pulled up the copper ring of a wooden door of a house that he was very familiar with and gently knocked on it. After a while, there was the sound of hurried footsteps coming from inside the wooden door. With a creak, the door was opened and a beautiful woman came out. It was Main Yang. I went out early this morning to buy a gift for my father-in-law. I had to go back to my parents' home on National Day, so I was late. Sorry. Chapter 885. The last time Li Yundong had seen Main Yang was on Mount Gazao. However, after they met face to face, no one could see each other clearly in the darkness. They could only hear their voices but not see each other. But at this time, when they suddenly met, both of them were stunned as if they hadn't expected to see each other here. Main Yang looked at Li Yundong in surprise, but soon she smiled sweetly and said, "It's you. Long time no see. You're more handsome than before." Li Yundong looked at the woman in front of him, who had once been reduced to prostitution, and said with some emotion, "You too. When we were on Mount Tianlong, I thought you were dead." Main Yang smiled slightly and said, "Some people are alive but they are already dead. Some people are dead but they are still alive. Who knows whether they are alive or dead?" This sentence was full of deep meaning. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat when he heard it, and he said meaningfully, "Has Lu Yi come back?" Main Yang smiled. Her smile was a little sad. "You're not the first to ask." Li Yundong said curiously, "Someone else has come to ask." Main Yang sighed softly and said, "People like him don't seem to know about his existence when he is fine. But when something happens, it seems that the whole world is his enemy. Many people have come to inquire about it. Do you want to come in and search? Anyway, if I don't let you in, you will still force your way in." As she said this, she stepped aside and crossed her arms in front of her chest. She squinted and raised her eyebrows, looking at Li Yundong with a hint of provocation. Li Yundong frowned and said, "Has anyone broken in?" Main Yang giggled and said, "Why? If I tell you, will you uphold justice for a weak girl like me?" Li Yundong suddenly fell silent. In the eyes of other sects in the cultivation world, Lu Yi was a scheming devil. The resurrection of the mystical silver fox had caused great damage to the cultivation world. If he could think that Lu Yi might not be dead, other people were not stupid, so they could naturally think of it. Therefore, from their standpoint, Lu Yi's life and death were naturally very important. In order to eliminate this hidden danger, it was normal to use some extreme means, not to mention breaking into a private house. Li Yundong sighed secretly. This was a different standpoint and their attitudes were completely different. Although he sympathized with Main Yang a little, he could not blatantly uphold the so-called justice for her at this time. Justice was always one-sided. For Lu Yi, resurrecting the mystical silver fox was the most righteous thing, but for other sects in the cultivation world, it was the most evil thing in the world. For many Islamists in the Middle East, the United States was the most evil, and the terrorist activities they carried out were the most righteous holy war, but for Americans and many Westerners, these terrorists were the most evil, and they were the righteous side. Since ancient times, the righteousness of one's own side must be the evil of the other side. There was no exception. Li Yundong's silence made Main Yang laugh more and more wantonly. She said with a smile, "It's you who didn't come in and have a look? It's not that I don't want you to come in and have a look, in case you come again next time and frame me, a lonely woman. I can't afford it." Main Yang was born in the dust. She had climbed from a little sister to a technician, and then from a technician to the position of a leader. Along the way she had climbed in this pit, and had long practiced the ability to coax and pester people. Although the few people who had come before were all cultivators with high cultivation, Mainyang was really desperate. She made a scene, rolled on the ground and went crazy. They really had a headache and their faces were dirty. They came arrogantly and left dejectedly. However, after all, Li Yundong could be considered an old acquaintance of Mainyang. Moreover, Li Yundong had a calm temperament that ordinary people did not have. She really could not put on such a rude attitude in front of this boy. Saying a few words that were hidden in silk floss was already her limit. Li Yundong didn't really expect to find Lu Ye's whereabouts here. After he smiled, he said to Mainyang, "You think too much. We don't want to embarrass you. If you have any difficulties in the future, you can come to me." Mainyang burst into laughter. She raised her eyebrows and looked at the women behind Li Yundong meaningfully. She giggled and said, "You already have so many beautiful women around you. What's wrong? Don't you think it's not enough? Aren't you afraid that you can't handle it? If you don't think I'm a pushover, it's not bad for me to come to you." Li Yundong suddenly remembered his encounter with Mainyang in front of the so-called property of the Fox Zen school. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Ziyuan, who was standing to one side, blushed slightly and looked elsewhere. Ruan Hongling curled her lips and showed a disdainful expression. Zhou Qin's eyes widened, and she was very unhappy with Mainyang's frivolous behavior. Li Yundong shook his head with a wry smile and said, "Forget it, I won't disturb you anymore. We'll leave first." Not long after Li Yundong and the others left, a person suddenly came out of the inner room. It was Yu Tian. Yu Tian gritted his teeth and looked at Mainyang, saying, "Do you know him?" Mainyang sighed softly. "Yes, I've had some fun with him." Yu Tian sneered and said, "It seems that your love for him is not shallow." Mainyang could hear the sarcasm in his tone. She raised her eyebrows and said lightly, "If you have any grudges with him, go and find him yourself. I'm just a weak woman. Why are you showing off your power in front of me?" As she spoke, she turned to close the door, making Yu Tian grit his teeth and his face turn red and blue. Mainyang was about to close the door when she suddenly heard a Buddhist chant. "Amit Ba, Lady Tanyu, please take your time to close the door." Mainyang was stunned. She saw a kind-looking old monk and several monks behind him coming to the door. Mainyang frowned. Before they could speak, she asked coldly, "Are you also looking for Lu Yi?" Li Yundong was handsome and had an outstanding temperament. Mainyang had some feelings for him, so she naturally talked to him with a smile. But at this time, an old monk was standing in front of her, so she didn't have a good face. The monk in the lead was none other than Master Purin, the abbot of Shiyuan Temple. Ever since his disciple Wu Hua had predicted the future, he had been keeping an eye on Lu Yi with his men. Although he had seen Lu Ye's head before, Purin was still a little worried. He had come here with his men and taken the initiative to enter the door to see if he could find any flaws. Purin made a palm with one hand and said, "Amit Ba, yes and no. We are looking for Benefactor Lu Yi, but we are not looking for Benefactor Lu Yi." Monks loved to talk about Zen, but they also had to see who they were talking to. If these words were said to Li Yundong, they might immediately have an exciting conversation. But if they were said to Mainyang, who came from a brothel, it was like casting coquettish glances at a blind person, playing the lute to a cow. Mainyang immediately giggled and said, "Master, your words are really profound. I don't understand. However, if you are not looking for Lu Yi, are you looking for me?" As she said this, she cast a coquettish glance at Purin. Purin was already in a state of emptiness, not the slightest bit affected by this beauty, but the disciples around him didn't have such a profound realm. The middle-aged monk Feikong scolded, "You woman, be a bit more dignified." This time, Mainyang immediately pulled a long face and sneered, "Be more dignified? You bald donkeys dare to say such things to me? When you first came to my shop you played with little sister. Not only did you renege on your debt, but you also King abducted my red-card little sister and ran away with you. CKU, you bald donkeys are usually sanctimonious. I didn't know that you were really good at picking up girls. How dare you say such things to me now?" Mainyang's dirty words made the faces of the monks turn purple. Feikong was so angry that the blue veins on his neck were bulging. He said angrily, "What did you say? Who played with my sister?" As soon as Mainyang opened the door, she sat on the ground and began to make a scene. Her hair was disheveled as she shouted, "Come on, the monks are playing hooligans." Shantang was a famous tourist attraction in Dongwu City. On weekdays it was crowded with people. Even in the alley where people lived, there were many people coming and going. Chinese people liked to watch lively scenes. As Mainyang made a scene, it immediately attracted a lot of people, and the hall was immediately blocked. Mainyang didn't even blush. Instead, with a face full of snot and tears, she tearfully complained about how No Flower had prostituted women without paying, and how he had abducted her popular young sister. She was originally a woman with money and power, and her eloquence was so good that she could bring the dead back to life. Moreover, the things she said were all true. The time, place, names and people were all clearly stated by her pretty mouth, and no one could help but believe her. The onlookers next to them could only sigh when they heard this, and their eyes immediately became meaningful when they looked at Purin and the others. Purin's realm was profound, so he could still hold on, but the monks around him were so red in the face that they wanted to find a hole to hide in. Fakon was so angry that he wanted to kill this woman with one slap. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Purin sighed and said to Mainyang, "Lady Tanyu, if you have any news about Lu Yi, you might as well tell me again. We will come again." When Mainyang heard this, she immediately burst into tears and said, "Everyone look. While my man is not at home, she came to bully a weak girl. These monks don't recite scriptures properly, they only know how to bully women." Purin did not have the slightest temper, but at this time, his face could not help but turn a little black. He shook his head and whispered, "What a sin, what a sin." Mainyang did not intend to let him go. She cried loudly and said, "Yes, I don't know where my man has gone. You should go to find him. Why are you looking for a weak girl like me? Am I being wronged or not? Did I commit a sin or not? What a great sin." Purin did not know whether to laugh or cry. Even though he was good at debating, he did not dare to say another word at this time. This was really a case of a scholar meeting a soldier. He didn't dare to stay any longer. He took a few monks and scurried away. After seeing them leave, Mainyang got up and patted the dust off her body as if nothing had happened. A frivolous man next to her saw that she was beautiful, so he came forward and said with a smile, "Hey, how much is it for one night? Let's have some fun together." Mainyang immediately scolded, "Go f*ck yourself." The crowd suddenly burst into laughter. Mainyang glanced at the red-faced man with a sneer and walked into the door with her head held high. But as soon as she closed the door, she suddenly sat down with her back against the door. Her body almost curled up into a ball, and tears kept flowing down her face. She whispered in a low voice, "My enemy, are you alive or dead? Do you know that I'm waiting for you here?" At this time, some cultivators from other sects who were hiding in the dark to inquire about the news, saw that Mainyang was so shrewd and that even Master Purin had to leave with a face full of dirt. They were so shocked that they didn't dare to go to the sect again and ask for trouble. For a moment, many cultivators from other sects who were ready to go up to the door stopped and quietly retreated. After an unknown period of time, the golden crow gradually fell and the U-rabbit ascended. The originally bustling Shantang town returned to tranquility. The streets and halls were devoid of people. Only then did a fox figure appear in a dark alley corner. The fox's entire body was green and it only had one tail. Its body was almost completely hidden in the shadows, revealing only a pair of deep and painful eyes. It stared at the house where Mainyang lived in a daze, its eyes full of deep affection. It looked at it quietly for a long time before it finally turned around slowly. Its footsteps were heavy and sluggish as it stepped into the shadows, never to look back again. It knew that it was better not to see each other than to see each other. I'll work hard on the chapter 10, but I don't think I'll be able to finish it tonight. Don't wait everyone. Let's read it tomorrow. I'll definitely make up for this chapter. Chapter 886. Li Yundong had found nothing in Dongwu City, and he still hadn't found any information about Lu Ye's whereabouts. As for Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong, there was no news of them and he didn't know where they were. He had to put down this matter for a while and concentrate on dealing with the mystical silver fox hiding in the purple gold luo pan. Li Yundong was now carrying the purple gold luo pan with him, which was really like carrying a time bomb, making people very uneasy. After leaving Dongwu City, Li Yundong took Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, Ruan Hongling, and Lin Miao to Mount Koya, Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. Because of Li Yundong and the others, except for Zhou Qin and Lin Miao, who had documents to enter and leave the country at any time, no one else had passports or documents, especially Su Chan, who was an unregistered resident. If she was checked on the street temporarily, she would be taken away. Therefore, Li Yundong and the others had to take Lin Miao, who couldn't fly, and Ruan Hongling, who couldn't fly for a long distance, to Mount Koya slowly. When they arrived at the foot of Mount Koya, they landed and walked all the way up the mountain. Although it was early in the morning, the foot of Mount Koya was still covered with snow. Many devout believers walked up the stairs and headed up the mountain. Although they had suffered heavy losses in a fierce battle, Xinyan Tantrism had a strong foundation after all. At this time they could still see 7 monks with high cultivation in a row. Some were holding Vajra-zen staffs, some were holding Vajra pestles, and some were holding wooden fish or alms bowls. They were wearing bamboo hats and extremely thin clothes, chanting sutras all the way. When the tourists at the side saw this, they all made way and bowed respectfully. However, these monks kept their heads down and walked straight away, as if the world around them was empty and the things around them were not disturbed. This caused many tourists to click their tongues and sigh. However, Li Yundong knew that at this time, Xinyan Tantrism had suffered heavy losses. They were on high alert, so they had sent a very strong lineup to patrol and guard. These monks seemed to be ordinary, but in fact the leading monk was a young monk in a purple Taoist robe. His cultivation realm was equal to that of a master at the Jinshin level. Although the monks behind him were wearing yellow Taoist robes, the lowest level was that of the young monk, who was only 1 level lower than the young monk. These 7 monks seemed to be in a row, but in fact their steps were mysterious. The distance between each person's position was exquisite, and the magical weapons in their hands were even more powerful. Although it was absolutely impossible to deal with a top master like the mystical silver fox, it was enough to deal with the possible conflicts and sneak attacks from the various sects in the cultivation world in Japan. As the saying goes, laymen watched the fun while insiders watched the Tao. When ordinary people saw these monks, they could only see their neat and solemn faces and solemn appearances, but they couldn't see the mystery behind them. In Li Yundong's eyes he was thoughtful and felt something. At Li Yundong's realm, even if he saw leaves falling and flowers blooming, he could also understand the truth of heaven and earth. Zhang Sanfeng watched cranes dancing and turtles moving, so he realized the truth of cultivation and founded the Wudong sect. Hua Tuo saw animals walking, so he created the 5 animals play. This was the saying, mortals breathe shallowly in their throats, while sages breathe deeply in their feet. It was a common thing, but when it came to Li Yundong, it became unusual. Although Li Yundong had not studied the magic circle with his current cultivation realm, as long as he saw any magic circle in the world, there was no mystery in his eyes. The mystery was in front of him, and it was like a butcher dismembering an ox. Li Yundong smiled slightly and sighed softly to Ziyuan beside him. Xinyan Tantrism is worthy of being the 2nd largest sect of Buddhism in Japan. After the Battle of Susanoo, there is still such a strong peripheral force. The foundation of this sect is amazing. Ziyuan also nodded slightly and sighed softly. If our Chinese cultivation world suffers such a blow, I'm afraid that it will take more than 10 or 20 years for us to recover. We may even be unable to recover. Looking back, the Xinyan Tantrism of Mount Koya will immediately have new blood. Although there are still no top masters, they have a large number of middle-level and high-level cultivators. As long as these people are still there, the foundation of this sect will not be shaken. Ziyuan was cautious and paid attention to the words she spoke, but at this time she also used a large number to describe the middle-level and high-level cultivators of Xinyan Tantrism. It could be seen that she was really shocked by the deep foundation of Xinyan Tantrism. In the Battle of Susanoo, Xinyan Tantrism sent 100 or 200 people, but only 20 or 30 people came back, and almost all of them were injured. Such a heavy casualty rate was simply shocking. If it had been another sect, it would have definitely collapsed immediately. Even the Jingyi school would have fallen apart after suffering such a blow. However, after taking a few breaths, Xinyan Tantrism immediately recovered. This kind of strong confidence really shocked the Chinese cultivators. The 2 of them were talking in a low voice, but the young monk in purple robes, who was not far away, suddenly became vigilant. There were many sects in the Japanese cultivation world, and there were many sects under one pope. The intrigue between each sect and the conflict between the sects was very fierce. These days they had been patrolling the mountain day and night in order to guard against other sects' evil intentions. Therefore, every step they took was in a state of high vigilance. Even if there were wanderers talking to them on the side of the road, they would absolutely ignore them so as not to be distracted and be attacked by others. On the way to the mountain, when they saw anyone suspicious, they would also walk towards this person. Although they did not necessarily have to go forward to investigate, it was inevitable to observe and test them closely. These people were all cultivators who had been urgently transferred back to the main mountain from the periphery of Xinyan Tantrism. Firstly, they had not participated in the public battle between Masako Tachibana and Li Yundong in Mount Koya, and secondly, they had not participated in the battle of Mount Heavenly King. Therefore they had no idea who Li Yundong was. The young monk, who was the leader, looked at Li Yundong up and down. He saw that although Li Yundong was handsome and had an extraordinary bearing, he could not see any Dharma power or Jinchi from his appearance. However, the women around him were more frightening, especially the three most beautiful women. The aura they exuded was even stronger than that of the young monk. The young monk was shocked in his heart. He cast a sharp gaze from the bamboo hat that was pressed down low and looked straight at Li Yundong. This gaze contained the Dharma power, Jinchi, and the pressure of Buddhism. Ordinary cultivators would not be able to withstand this gaze immediately, and their blood and qi would be greatly disturbed. However, when Li Yundong was stared at by this gaze, it was as if the wind was blowing on his face. He didn't feel it, but there was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. The young monk was shocked. He couldn't help but raise his head to look at Li Yundong. There was a burst of fear in his heart for no reason. He had never met such an opponent. The young monk said something to the monk behind him in a low voice. Without saying anything, the monk turned around and ran up the mountain. The young monk himself stepped forward, politely but vigilantly formed a palm with one hand. He saluted and said, "This Tanyu, where did you come from?" He spoke in Japanese. Li Yundong smiled and said, "From China?" The young monk was stunned and said in half-baked Chinese, "Are you from China?" He looked at Li Yundong in bewilderment and asked tentatively, "May I know your name?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I'm Li Yundong." The young monk's body suddenly shook and his eyes widened. He couldn't help but take a step back as if he couldn't believe his eyes. He cried out involuntarily, "Are you the reincarnated Wisdom King, Lord Battler?" His shout immediately attracted many tourists around them to look at them curiously. Although many of them were local believers, their understanding of the cultivation world was very shallow. How could they know what the two words Reincarnated Wisdom King and Lord Battler meant? At this time, the name Li Yundong was really well known in the Japanese cultivation world. There was nothing more resounding than this name. The monks behind the young monk were even more shocked and felt a strong sense of disbelief. They couldn't believe that they had seen the reincarnated Wisdom King who had sealed the mystical silver fox. Li Yundong smiled faintly and said, "I don't dare to be called Lord Battler, but I seem to be the Li Yundong you are talking about. What? Do you want to test whether I'm real or not?" Although the young monk had not participated in the Battle of Suyi, he had heard of it, especially the 1,000-year grudge between the immovable Wisdom King and the mystical silver fox, as well as the story of the three immortals fighting against the celestial fox. It had really spread in the Japanese cultivation world in the past 2 days, and everyone knew it. The Japanese loved romance. The romance of deification and the romance of the three kingdoms of China were both masterpieces that the Japanese could not put down. The various romances about the warring states period in their own country were even more popular. The fierce battle between the Chinese and Japanese cultivation worlds against the mystical silver fox was fierce. Although the battle was fierce and the Japanese cultivation world was severely damaged, many cultivators who came to watch the fun went back and told the story of the battle in Suyi like a romance story. The story in it was talked about with great relish. As the saying goes, a person's name is like the shadow of a tree. The young monk saw that Li Yundong's cultivation was unfathomable, and the women next to him were all extraordinary, especially the three most beautiful ones among them. Although their temperaments were different, they were indeed as beautiful as immortals. They were in line with the three temperaments of the legendary fairy immortal, human immortal and fox immortal. You had to believe it. At this time the young monk took another step back and bowed respectfully. "I didn't know it was Wisdom King. I'm really impolite." A monk behind him stepped forward and whispered a few words to him. The young monk's face immediately changed and he blurted out in his familiar Japanese, "Hurry up, go and catch up with him. Go and tell the great monk that Li Yundong, the reincarnated Wisdom King, is here." The monk immediately ran up the mountain path. The young monk was looking at his figure, and his heart was filled with anxiety. "Just now I was afraid that Li Yundong and the others were experts sent by other sects to take advantage of the situation, so I sent a monk up the mountain to inform them, hoping to intercept this news. Otherwise, when all the experts on the mountain come out in full force shouting to kill Li Yundong, and angering the Akalanatha, that would really be the end of me." Early in the morning, a strange reader came online and said to me, "Tang Chuan, why are you still alive?" I, who was writing, suddenly lost the mood to write. I was really speechless. There were all kinds of birds in the big forest. Well, these days I have been disturbed a lot and I have been hesitating whether to block the messages from strangers. Now it seems that the answer is really obvious. There are some people that you really can't afford to offend, and you really can't afford to hurt them. Student, you helped me make a decision. Thank you. Chapter 887. When the monk who had reported the news ran up the mountain quickly, the monk who had gone up the mountain before had already rushed into the Sangharama Taoist Hall, out of breath. The Sangharama Taoist Hall was the oldest Taoist hall in Mount Koya. Master Hongfa had built this Taoist hall when he opened the mountain. It was also known as the Altar Sangharama. This Taoist hall was divided into the Golden Hall Lecture Hall, the Fundamental Tower, the West Tower, and the East Tower. At this time, the monk rushed into the immovable lecture hall in the Sangharama Taoist Hall. At this time, the great monk was giving a lecture in the Taoist Hall, surrounded by monks and Kasaya. Although the battle had just ended, the daily cultivation was an indispensable course for the monks of Xinyan Tantrism. Gu Shiguang was telling everyone in the Taoist Hall about the great mystery of the immovable wisdom king's Mahamudra. The Japanese were good at learning. If they found that someone was stronger than them and defeated them, they would immediately learn from them in the most humble manner. After Li Yundong defeated Masako Tachibana, it attracted the attention of the Japanese cultivation world. But at this time they did not feel shocked. They only felt that it was natural for Masako Tachibana to lose when she met the reincarnated Wisdom King. How could a fake win against a real one? However, when Li Yundong fought with the mystical silver fox and finally sealed the mystical silver fox, the Japanese cultivation world could not help but be shocked. They could not imagine that there was someone in the world who could fight with the mystical silver fox alone. The horror of the mystical silver fox had been recorded in countless books in Japan. The fox demon Yuzaochin was even more well known in Japan. Therefore, the fierce battle between Li Yundong and the mystical silver fox brought unimaginable shock to the Japanese cultivators. This fierce battle touched the nerves of the Japanese cultivators. They finally realized that they were complacent and arrogant. On the first day when Gu Shiguang of Xinyan Tantrism returned to Mount Koya with his monks, he announced that from today on, the research and study of the reincarnated Wisdom King would be officially put on the cultivation curriculum of Xinyan Tantrism, and it would be the #1 important topic. Today was Kaisei Hikari's first lecture for the reincarnated Wisdom King, Li Yundong. He was demonstrating the magic of the mantra Mahamudra with both hands when he saw a monk rushing in from outside the door. Without saying anything, he almost rushed in. The social class and country was extremely strict, especially in the cultivation sections. It was extremely bad to break into the Taoist field without greeting. Although Kaisei Hikari was shrewd, he couldn't help but pull a long face at this time and scolded, "Wukong, have you lost your soul? Look at you. What a scandal. What kind of person are you?" It was equivalent to holding an iron rice bowl for the rest of their lives. Therefore many people yearned for the job of monks. The monks of Xinyan Tantrism were divided into 16 classes. Among them there were teachers, lawyers, junior monks, middle monks, senior monks and senior monks. They all needed to have the corresponding educational background to be able to hold the post. 4 monks at the level of junior monks, promotion was not only based on their educational background, but also on their spiritual power cultivation, as well as their research and understanding of Buddhism. Kyoto was an extremely important first-tier city in Japan. In this city, the forces of the 3 giants of Japanese Buddhism, the Tiantai sect, the Xinyan Tantrism, and the Pure Land sect, were intertwined. It was not uncommon for the 3 to fight for believers with each other. This kind of competition could not be carried out in the open, but was mostly reflected in the competition for students and students. Therefore, in this complex and sensitive place, it was absolutely impossible to hold the position of the principal of Xinyan Tantrism University without great cultivation and great wisdom. Xinyan Tantrism had always attached great importance to the territory of Jingdo. Even when facing the mystical silver fox, they did not move their men stationed in Jingdo. Only after suffering a heavy blow and the emptiness of Xinyan Tantrism was threatened did they have no choice but to urgently call back Shilong, the principal of Mount Koya, who was in charge of Jingdo. The young monk of Shilong was quite old, but because he was born in a poor family, unlike Kaisei Hikari and the others who were born in the upper class, his promotion was quite slow. He had been a young monk for most of his life. However, although his position could not be promoted, the prestige of the young monk of Shilong was quite high in Mount Koya. He had been the principal of Mount Koya University for many years. Many monks in the lecture hall were his students. It could be said that there were many disciples and peaches all over the world. In the eyes of many monks here, although the young monk of Shilong was not of a high rank, his resume was amazing and his magic power was profound. He was second only to the great monk of Kaisei Hikari. When they heard Monk Wukong say that the young monk of Shilong was not as good as a few female cultivators, they were so shocked that they shouted loudly again, "This is impossible. How many women in the world can be stronger than the young monk of Shillong? How could they all appear at the foot of the mountain? Is it the sect of Shintoism? The witches and goddesses of the Shintoism were all very powerful cultivators, but in the Japanese Shintoism, there were only a handful of beautiful witches and goddesses with profound magic power. The monks discussed and guessed, could it be that the other sects of Shintoism have joined forces to attack us? Kaisai Hikari saw that they were getting more and more outrageous, so he frowned and shouted, "Quiet, all of you." As he said that, he stood up and said in a dignified manner, "Wukong, lead the way. Let me meet this strong enemy." At this time, the monks in the lecture hall also stood up and said loudly, "Great monk, please let us follow in your footsteps." As he said that, everyone got up and went down the mountain with a murderous aura. These people were all monks of high seniority in the Kangabuji temple of Mount Koya. When they moved together, they immediately attracted the attention of many monks. They asked around and were immediately shocked. What? A strong enemy had come to the foot of the mountain? How could this be? Let's go together. For a moment, everyone went down the mountain. The monk in the lead was wearing a red cassock. Behind him were some monks in purple cassock, but most of them were monks in yellow cassock. At this time, from a distance, it seemed that there was a yellow torrent on the mountain road, rolling down the stone steps with great momentum. However, when this group of people walked halfway up the mountain, they saw a monk walking up quickly and bumping into the great monk Kaisai Hikari. When the monk saw this, he immediately waved his hands vigorously and said with a pale face, "Great monk, you can't do this, you can't do this." Kaisai Hikari's face darkened. "Why not? Make it clear." The monk swallowed his saliva and looked at the crowd with fear on his face. He said, "The person at the foot of the mountain is the reincarnated wisdom king, Li Yundong." When everyone heard this, they were all shocked. What? The reincarnated wisdom king is here? Is he here to be our enemy? Many monks had participated in the battle in which Li Yundong defeated Masako Tachibana. They knew that he had some friction with Jinyin Tantrism. At this time there was a sudden change. They thought of the worst and couldn't help but say with a sad face, "Is the reincarnated wisdom king going to destroy his own Taoist field with his own hands?" When Kaisai Hikari heard this, he turned his head and scolded, "Nonsense." He turned his head and said in a deep voice, "Did the reincarnated wisdom king say what he came for?" Although his voice was still calm, his hands hidden in the wide monk robe were trembling slightly. If Li Yundong really came with hostility, then the foundation of Jinyin Tantrism for more than 1,000 years would be destroyed. Fortunately, the monk shook his head quickly and said, "The reincarnated wisdom king doesn't seem to be hostile. He's having a good conversation with the young monk Shillong." When everyone heard this, they suddenly seemed to come back to their senses and felt lucky. Kaisai Hikari's tense face couldn't help relaxing. He asked, "Oh? Is he here to visit the mountain?" The monk hesitated for a moment and said, "It seems so." Only then did Kaisai Hikari feel relieved. He immediately turned around and said to the monks behind him, "Go and open the gate of Kangabuji Temple. I want all 3 gates to be opened. Ring the bell and play music to welcome the reincarnated wisdom king." When these monks heard this, they were shocked. Some of them blurted out, "Great monk Zheng, this is the etiquette to welcome His Majesty the Mikado?" Kaisai Hikari said seriously, "If we don't do this, we can't show the attitude of our Jinyin Tantrism. Go." At this time, a monk turned around and left. After a while, Li Yundong, who was waiting at the foot of the mountain, heard the sound of a big bell ringing in unison on Mount Koya, followed by the sound of drums, bowls, and other magical instruments playing music. The gate of Kangabuji Temple of Mount Koya creaked open, and a group of monks walked down the stone steps on the mountainside. It was Kaisai Hikari, the great monk in red robes. Chapter 888. Kaisai Hikariuni led the monks of Jinyin Tantrism down the mountain. After arriving at the foot of the mountain, Kaisai Hikariuni walked out of the crowd alone. He made a palm with one hand, bowed, and said the name of Buddha. Amitabha, the great monk of Jinyin Tantrism of Mount Koya, Kaisai Hikariuni, has led the monks to greet His Highness the Immovable Wisdom King. His words were spoken in Japanese, not Chinese. Although his words were polite, his etiquette was the etiquette of the sects meeting each other, not that of a subordinate meeting a superior. Soon. After all, Jinyin Tantrism was the second largest force in Japanese Buddhism. It was a huge cultivation sect with a history of nearly 1,200 years. If they were too polite, it would be really troublesome if they were attacked in the future. But even so, it still shocked many tourists nearby. Some Japanese tourists looked at Li Yundong in shock and widened their eyes. They couldn't believe their eyes. This handsome man is actually the reincarnation of Wisdom King? In the Shinto temples of Japan, the reincarnation of Wisdom King looked extremely ferocious. In the hearts of the Japanese, the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King must be 8 feet tall, with a waist circumference of 8 feet. Moreover, his eyes were like copper bells, and he had a big mouth that could eat a little child in one bite. That was the real immovable Wisdom King. But the man in front of him was not only handsome, but also elegant and modest, which made people feel happy at first sight. How could he be as fierce as the legend said? At this time, there were at least 800 or 900 monks from Xinyan Tantrism coming out to greet him, and most of them had high cultivation quotients. With so many monks looking at one place, the pressure could be imagined. But at this time, Li Yundong had a gentle smile on the corner of his mouth. Although he was received with extremely heavy etiquette, he was calm and his face did not change. He had the bearing of a great master. Some of the monks who had never seen Li Yundong in person could not help but admire him when they saw his dignified bearing. They sighed in a low voice and said, "He is indeed the Wisdom King who can't be moved by the wind. He deserves his reputation, he deserves it." Li Yundong saw that Kaisai Hikaryuni was talking to him with etiquette. After hearing Ziyuan's translation, he also said in Chinese, "Your Excellency is too polite. This time, I actually came here to discuss something with Your Excellency and the eminent monks of Xinyan Tantrism." Kaisai Hikaryuni was proficient in Chinese. The reason why he spoke in Japanese was because of foreign etiquette. As a great monk of Xinyan Tantrism, he naturally couldn't speak the language of other countries in public. This was very embarrassing. After hearing this, his heart moved. After quickly glancing at Li Yundong and the others, he smiled slightly and said, "There is a saying in China, it's a pleasure to have friends coming from afar. Your Highness, Wisdom King has come from afar. We should go out to welcome you, but I don't know why Your Highness, Wisdom King, has come this time." Li Yundong tilted his head slightly to listen to Ziyuan's translation and said, "Great Monk Zheng, shall we talk here?" Kaisai Hikaryuni smiled and said, "It's my fault. Your Highness, Wisdom King, please come in." As he said this, he turned sideways and motioned for Li Yundong to go ahead. Li Yundong saw that the other party was very polite, so he was also very polite. He was not willing to take the lead. After exchanging some pleasantries with Kaisai Hikaryuni, he insisted on walking side by side with him. Kaisai Hikaryuni was a little surprised. He didn't expect that Li Yundong would come with the power of defeating the mystical silver fox. He was so modest, without any arrogance. He was not as aggressive as he had been when he visited Mount Koya before. When he was secretly impressed, he couldn't help sighing to himself, "Why is there no such person in our Japanese cultivation world?" After a group of people surrounded Li Yundong and the others up the mountain, Kaisai Hikaryuni took Li Yundong and the others to the motionless lecture hall. After they sat down according to their seats, Kaisai Hikaryuni said in a fluent Chinese language, "Your Highness, may I ask who these people are?" As he said this, he looked at Ruan Hongling and Lin Miao. Xinyan Tantrism had a huge and sophisticated intelligence department. Of course, he knew who these two people were, but he said this in order to find a smooth topic to start a dialogue between the two sides. Hearing this, Li Yundong introduced Ruan Hongling and Lin Miao with a smile. After the two of them exchanged some pleasantries, Li Yundong went straight to the point and took out the purple gold luo pan. He placed it in front of him and said, "Great monk, do you recognize this powerful magical weapon?" When Kaisai Hikaryuni saw it, his face suddenly changed. He blurted out, "Isn't this the powerful magical weapon that seals the mystical silver fox?" He looked at Li Yundong in surprise and couldn't help asking, "Your Highness, why did you bring this powerful magical weapon to our Mount Koya?" Kaisai Hikaryuni stared at the powerful magical weapon, raised his head and asked, "Your Highness, do you want to seal this powerful magical weapon in our Mount Koya?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and asked, "Your Highness, if I have this intention, is your sect willing to bear this responsibility?" These words made the monks in the hall look at each other. They were not stupid. How could they be willing to take on this hot potato when the Xinyan Tantrism was suffering heavy losses? Kaisai Hikaryuni immediately smiled bitterly. He knew that he had been defeated by Li Yundong, and he secretly regretted that he didn't dare to ask this question. But after all, he was shrewd and ruthless. He asked in return, "If I say yes, Jinren Li, are you willing to put such a precious powerful magical weapon in Kangabuji Temple for safekeeping?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "As long as your sect is willing to agree, I will. You'll be there soon." Kaisai Hikaryuni also laughed and said, "As long as your Highness is willing to, then our Kangabuji Temple will welcome you. There's nothing to refuse." Ruan Hongling, who was standing to one side, heard their conversation and was secretly anxious. She secretly transmitted her voice to Ziyuan and said angrily, "Shiji Ziyuan, why did Li Yundong send our things here and there?" However, Ziyuan transmitted her voice in a low voice and shouted, "If you don't understand, don't talk. Li Yundong is testing him. Think about it, if you were the great monk and Li Yundong came up and said that he wanted to get the Wisdom King's Dharmakaya in your Mount Koya, what would you do?" Ruan Hongling was just straightforward, but she was not stupid. After being pointed out, her eyes suddenly lit up and she suddenly understood. She transmitted her voice and said, "Ah, I understand. If I were the great monk, I would either find this Wisdom King's Dharmakaya and swallow it to strengthen my sect, or I would be a rare commodity and ask for an exorbitant price from Li Yundong." Although there were warmth and coldness in the world, the relationship between interests had always been ruthless. Even Du Fei and the others of the Chuanjin sect, who had always been on good terms with Li Yundong, did not dare to say a word for Li Yundong on some sensitive occasions as long as the interests of the sect were involved. He was afraid of getting into trouble and violating the interests of the sect. Du Fei and the others were like this, let alone the Xinyan Tantrism, which had some conflicts with Li Yundong. What's more, this was a big cultivation sect in Japan. Li Yundong was well aware of this, so he took a big detour. First, he threw out something that Kaisai Hikari could not accept, and then he slowly bargained with him to avoid being extorted by the other party's righteous words. After all, this was their home ground. If these Japanese monks were determined to shed all pretenses and refuse to give him the Wisdom King's Dharmakaya, then even if Li Yundong killed all the people in Mount Koya, it would be useless. In the end, there was no other way but to stare at them. The two of them, one old and one young, were both lying through their teeth. Kaisai Hikari and Li Yundong looked at each other and smiled hypocritically for a while. They both cursed each other in their hearts, because they both knew that Li Yundong could not put this powerful magical weapon here. Kaisai Hikari had been to Mount Longhu and seen this powerful magical weapon. He knew that this powerful magical weapon did not belong to Li Yundong. Li Yundong also knew that the Xinyan Tantrism had suffered heavy losses in the fierce battle, so he would not dare to keep this hot potato. Otherwise, if other sects had evil intentions and made a righteous name, he shouted, "We will go to Mount Koya and destroy the purple gold luo disc hidden in the Xinyan Tantrism, so that the mystical silver fox will have no power to reverse the situation and will never have any future troubles for the future generations." This sentence seemed dignified, but in fact, it was shameless and vicious to the extreme. It was fake to kill the mystical silver fox, and the real thing was to destroy the Xinyan Tantrism. It was just like the Chinese cultivation sects besieging the Fox Zen school. It was fake to enforce justice on behalf of heaven and kill the demons. It was real to divide the magic treasures and wealth of the Fox Zen school. If someone shouted out with ulterior motives, 80% of the cultivation sects in Japan would respond and then flock to Mount Koya. Most of them didn't dare to face the difficulties, but who wouldn't be willing to step on a drowning dog? Although the Xinyan Tantrism was powerful, if it lost its righteousness and was attacked by the Japanese cultivation sects, the destruction of the sect would only be a matter of day. Therefore, after killing Kaisai Hikari, he didn't dare to leave the purple gold luo disc, which seemed to be infinitely beautiful magic treasure, in Mount Koya, because it was equivalent to courting death. Seeing Kaisai Hikari's words, Li Yundong simply pushed the purple gold luo disc to Kaisai Hikari and said, "Your Excellency, since the Xinyan Tantrism has such a responsibility, I will leave this purple gold luo disc in your sect. Please keep it strictly and make sure that the mystical silver fox can escape from it." The corner of Kaisai Hikari's eyes twitched when he heard this. He had said it beautifully, but now the other party was stepping on his face. How could he dare to take it? Kaisai Hikariuni forced a smile and said, "Your Highness, the Wisdom King, is really flattering and honored. However, this old monk is in fear and trepidation that your sect doesn't dare to take in such an important and precious magic treasure alone. Otherwise, if it spoils your Highness, the Wisdom King, it will be a waste of your Highness' trust and good intentions." His words were also dignified and his posture was extremely low, as if he was saying, "Boss, don't play with me. How dare I accept it? Aren't you harming me?" Seeing that Kaisai Hikari was begging for mercy in a roundabout way, Li Yundong didn't intend to let him go. He said with a smile, "What are you talking about? Your sect has a deep foundation and great power. I've experienced it before. I'm relieved to leave this magic treasure with you." Kaisai Hikari was so angry that his face turned purple. He almost scolded Japan. "You bastard, you're really endless. What on earth are you doing here? Are you here to burn incense or to tear down the temple? Just give me a number." Kaisai Hikari just shook his head and refused to agree. His attitude was getting lower and lower. At this time, the smart people on the scene had seen the clues, and their expressions were strange. Zhou Qin and Lin Miao were from an official family, and the other was from a business family. They could see through these tricks at a glance. Both of them remained calm and watched Li Yundong and Kaisai Hikari exchange blows. This kind of exchange was not as fierce and dangerous as fighting, but it also tested a person's level of appearance and wisdom. They saw that Li Yundong had made a great monk like Kaisai Hikari look embarrassed with just a few words, and they couldn't help but admire him in their hearts. But for the monks on Kaisai Hikari's side, they didn't admire him at all. At this moment, some of the monks looked at Li Yundong angrily and thought, this reincarnated wisdom king looks so young. How can he be so cunning? No, he's cunning. Too cunning, too hateful. Finally. I made it up. I'm going to sleep. Chapter 889. As the saying goes, a rogue can do magic and an immortal can't stop him. Soon. When the reincarnated wisdom king started to act like a hooligan, even the great emperor of Yu Huang would have to retreat in defeat. There was nothing he could do about it. Li Yunyang's face was righteous and his words were dignified, but his actual actions were shameless. He grasped the key of Xinyan Tantrism and refused to let go. Kaisai Hikari was so angry that one Buddha ascended to the heavens, 2 Buddhas left his body, but he couldn't lose his temper. It was just like how the United States coerced the Japanese into signing an alliance in the Plaza Agreement, causing the Japanese economy to regress for 10 years. However, the Japanese did not dare to openly scold the Americans, because the national security of this country was covered by the United States. If they were disobedient, they would suffer even more. Xinyan Tantrism was now in such a situation. As the saying goes, the situation is stronger than the person. Even if the person in front of him had a feud with him, he could only grit his teeth and bear it with a smile on his face. Kaisai Hikari and Li Yundong had a tug-of-war back and forth. Originally, he had hoped that Li Yundong's prestige was like the sun in the sky at this time, so he could be afraid of his status as Wisdom King and restrain himself. However, he didn't expect that the reincarnated Wisdom King would act shamelessly, which was really surprising. However, he didn't know that Li Yundong used to be half a rogue. He spoke with a cheeky face, but after cultivation, his bearing gradually calmed down, and he had the demeanor of a great master. However, at this time, when it came to such a sensitive matter, Li Yundong was just playing his true colors again. Kaisai Hikari's eyebrows were drooping. Seeing that Li Yundong refused to let go, he was extremely depressed, but he still pretended to be happy and said, His Highness Wisdom King thinks so highly of our Xinyan Tantrism. How dare we not obey? However, I don't know why His Highness Wisdom King values our Mount Koya so much. Kaisai Hikari's words were polite, but in fact he wanted to say, F***CKU. There are so many cultivation sects in Japan, and it's not like our Xinyan Tantrism is the only one. In addition to Mount Koya, there are also Mount Hai and Wish Temple. By the way, Mount Wisdom and Mount Hengshan of the New Meaning sect are famous Taoist sites. Why did you come to Mount Koya? A dead monk can't kill a poor monk. Your Highness, Wisdom King, can you King go and harm others? Li Yundong naturally understood the subtext. He smiled slightly and said seriously, Your Excellency, you are too polite. Mount Koya Hikari is one of the largest Taoist sites in Japan, and it is the main mountain of Xinyan Tantrism. Almost all the famous eminent monks in Japan for thousands of years came from Mount Hai, but almost all the eminent monks and celebrities in Japan were buried in Mount Koya. I think there is no better place in the world to seal this magic treasure than here. Mount. At this time, Kaisai Hikari's face suddenly became very interesting. He didn't know whether to cry or laugh. What Li Yundong said was the proudest point of Xinyan Tantrism, but now it had become their fatal weakness. Kaisai Hikari really burst into tears in his heart and swallowed his blood. He couldn't say anything. He couldn't hold Li Yundong's hand and beg bitterly, Your Highness Wisdom King, what do you value about us? Can't we change it? Of course he couldn't say that. Otherwise he wouldn't be a monk anymore. At this point, Kaisai Hikari couldn't hold on any longer. He had to raise the white flag and say, His Highness Wisdom King's high hopes and favor really make Mount Koya feel honored. But after the battle with the mystical silver fox, our Xinyan Tantrism has suffered heavy losses. I'm afraid we can't fulfill His Highness Wisdom King's great trust. At this point, Xinyan Tantrism was completely terrified. A man could say anything but he could never say that he couldn't do it. The same was true for the cultivation sections. If he admitted in public that he couldn't do it, who would join this sect in the future? When Kaisai Hikaryuni said this, the monks in the motionless lecture hall were all dejected and dejected. This was simply lying down and being beaten. The little brother has already admitted defeat, big brother, do as you see fit. Li Yunyang didn't care about his identity and face at all. He stepped forward and pushed Kaisai Hikari into a dead end. He was waiting for Kaisai Hikari to say this. Seeing that the other party had raised the white flag, he didn't want to let him go. He said, "Your Excellency is too modest. Xinyan Tantrism is a famous sect in Japan. The last time I came to Xinyan Tantrism to participate in the fighting, I was deeply impressed by the strength of your sect. I really can't think of anyone else who can take on this heavy responsibility except your sect." Kaisai Hikari really wanted to spit a mouthful of blood on Li Yunyang's face. His old face twitched a little. No one knew whether he was laughing or crying. Even Zhou Qin, who had some conflicts with Xinyan Tantrism before, couldn't help but sympathize with him. But she also knew that if Li Yunyang politely came to them and said, "I'm sorry everyone. My Wisdom King's Dharmakaya is with you. I want to take it. Can I?" The consequences could be imagined. The people of Xinyan Tantrism were not idiots. Would they transfer the Wisdom King's Dharmakaya for nothing? If Li Yunyang didn't bully them at this time and force them into a corner, they would force him into a corner in the future. Kaisai Hikari lowered his body deeply and once again lowered his posture. He said in an extremely painful tone, "Your Highness, I don't deserve your praise. I don't understand. What ability does our Mount Koya have to protect this powerful magical weapon? If the mystical silver fox breaks out, what should we do? Your Highness, Wisdom King, you may not know this, but the mystical silver fox has always been guarded by the Tiantai sect and the Tiyuman family." "Ah, that is, the Abe family. Why don't you find?" Kaisai Hikari was indeed a scheming person. At this time he still wanted to bring trouble to others. On the side, the young monk of Shilong and the others saw that Kaisai Hikari had been bullied by Li Yundong for several rounds, and at this time he finally played a trick. They secretly applauded in their hearts and couldn't help but smile in admiration. However, Li Yunyang said with a pained face, "If they really have the ability to guard the mystical silver fox, there won't be these tragedies in the future. In my opinion, the Tiantai sect and the Ape family are not as reliable as the Xinyan Tantrism. After all, this is the Taoist field of the immovable Wisdom King." Before the smiles on the faces of these monks could finish blooming, they immediately froze and looked at each other. Kaisai Hikari's eyebrows twitched. He saw Li Yunyang's regretful and pained expression. It really seemed to come from the bottom of his heart. His acting was so sincere that even an Oscar winner would die of inferiority if he saw it. Kaisai Hikari's heart was in pain. He wished he could take the wooden fish and knock it on his head. "If you bully me again, I'll die in front of you." He had lived for most of his life, and this was the first time he had been so miserable in front of everyone. It was really... how could he bear it? At this moment, Kaisai Hikari heard a crisp voice coming from outside the immovable lecture hall. It was a girl who couldn't help asking, "Why can the immovable Wisdom King's Taoist field protect the mystical silver fox?" When everyone heard the voice, they turned their heads and saw a beautiful girl in a kimono. She was blinking her big eyes and looking at the field. It was Tachibana Wakako. When Kaisai Hikari heard her words, it was as if he had heard the sound of nature. He seemed to have grasped something in his heart and quickly asked, "Yes, Your Highness the Wise King, why is that?" Li Yunyang had put Kaisai Hikari in a dead end back and forth just to make him ask such a question. However, he didn't expect that he had tried so hard several times. The old man was a little confused at this critical moment. It was Tachibana Wakako's childish words that revealed the secret of heaven. Li Yundong turned his head to look at Tachibana Wakako with a smile and nodded to her. After quarreling with her mother, Tachibana Wakako slipped out of the Aoyuan. Along the way she was bored and had nowhere to go. Naturally, she wandered around and went to the Kangabuji temple. However, she saw that there were almost no monks in the temple. Everyone was gathered in the immovable lecture hall, so she went over curiously. Tachibana Wakako had a high status in the Xinyan Tantrism. As soon as she approached, the monks immediately made way for her, so that she could enter the lecture hall without any obstacles. She was simple-minded. After listening to the conversation between Li Yunyang and Kaisai Hikaryuni, she didn't understand the subtext at all. She only felt that the great monk was very strange. Why didn't he ask about it? However, Tachibana Wakako misunderstood Kaisai Hikari. In his position, as soon as he heard that Li Yundong wanted to store the purple gold Luo disc in Mount Koya, even if he had a tiger's courage, he would be scared to death. If this matter led to the destruction of the Xinyan Tantrism, who could bear the responsibility? As a result, Kaisai Hikari did not want to ask about this matter. He was afraid that if he asked, he would ask about something else and cause a stir. He wanted to reject this matter first, but seeing that it was useless to say anything, he could only bite the bullet and ask this question. After Li Yundong smiled at Tachibana Wakako, he turned around and said to Kaisai Hikari, "Your Excellency, you should know that the immovable Wisdom King and the mystical Silver Fox are mortal enemies. If there is anyone in the world who can compete with the mystical Silver Fox, it must be the immovable Wisdom King. Is that right?" Kaisai Hikari didn't expect that Li Yundong, the reincarnated Wisdom King, would set up a trap for him shamelessly. After a few moves he was already a little confused. He nodded subconsciously and said, "As His Highness the Wisdom King said." Li Yundong didn't wait for him to continue. He clapped his hands and said, "That's right. Mount Koya is the Taoist field of the immovable Wisdom King. Only here can the mystical Silver Fox be suppressed." Kaisai Hikari thought for a while in a daze and asked in fear and trepidation, "I haven't asked His Highness the Wisdom King yet. This Mount Koya is the Taoist field of the immovable Wisdom King. What does it have to do with whether it can suppress the mystical Silver Fox? After all, this is just a Taoist field and there is no real Wisdom King. If there is a real Wisdom King, it is you, Your Highness." Kaisai Hikari's words were full of flattery. Others felt numb when they heard it, but Kaisai Hikari, an eminent monk, was pestered by Li Yundong to the point that he couldn't get out of the stage. At this time he didn't care about his face at all. Li Yundong said with an evil smile, "Of course it's related. Since this is the Taoist field of the immovable Wisdom King, there must be the Dharmakaya of the Wisdom King. Since there is the Dharmakaya of the Wisdom King, it will definitely be able to suppress the mystical Silver Fox." If it had been someone else who said this, Kaisai Hikari would have spat on the other party's face. "Bah, you can suppress it just because you say so? Or you?" However, it was the reincarnated Wisdom King himself who said this. In this matter, there was no one in the world more authoritative than Li Yundong. Kaisai Hikari asked doubtfully, "Is the Dharmakaya of the Wisdom King in Mount Koya? Why didn't I know that?" Li Yundong formed a palm with one hand, bowed and said with a smile, "Amitba, the great sound is silent, and the great way is invisible. If the Dharmakaya can appear in an ordinary way, it is not a real Dharmakaya." As he said this, he pretended to push the purple gold luo pan in front of Kaisai Hikari, as if he was about to leave. "Your Excellency, please don't refuse any more." Kaisai Hikari was shocked. He quickly grabbed Li Yundong's sleeve and said, "Your Highness, where is the Dharmakaya? Please tell me. If there is really a Dharmakaya, please take it away personally. In the future, with the power of the Dharmakaya, wouldn't it be better to suppress and guard this powerful magical weapon day and night?" Li Yundong had long been laughing in his stomach, but he looked embarrassed. He turned half of his body and said hesitantly, "I'm afraid that's not good, is it?" Kaisai Hikari hurriedly said, Okay, the Dharmakaya of the Wisdom King belongs to the Wisdom King. As the saying goes, things belong to their owners. This is the mercy of Buddha and everyone is happy. What's wrong with it?" Li Yundong pretended to hesitate for a while, then sighed and said, "Well, if I don't go to hell, who will?" At this time, when the monks in the motionless lecture hall saw that Li Yundong had finally agreed not to leave the powerful magical weapon in Mount Koya, they immediately breathed a sigh of relief, as if they had survived a great disaster. Su Chan, Ziyuan, and the others next to him all held back their laughter when they saw this. Lin Miao was even more stunned and said in a low voice, "Oh my God, fortunately Master didn't go to business. Otherwise, all the businessmen in the world wouldn't be able to live." Li Yundong's behavior was like selling someone and asking them to count the money for him. He was more cunning than a businessman and more shameless than a scoundrel. Ruan Hongling, who was watching from the side, snickered and said to Ziyuan in a low voice, "Shiji Ziyuan, what's the saying? If a rogue knows magic, even an immortal can't stop him." At this time, Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing in a low voice. "What about Wisdom King?" Ruan Hongling giggled and said, "The immortal has fallen to the ground. I'll take a leave and go to my father-in-law's house tomorrow. I have to get up early and rest early. It's almost midnight. Don't wait. I wish you a happy National Day. Eat and drink well." Chapter 890. Li Yundong followed up step by step, forcing Kaisai Hikari into a dead end and forcing him to give in. Although Kaisai Hikari was shrewd and astute, his vital parts were vital parts. Either he couldn't hit him or if he hit him he would be killed in one blow. Moreover, if Kaisai Hikari hadn't been sitting in the position of the great monk of Xinyan Tantrism, Li Yundong wouldn't have been able to persuade him to give in even if he had fought with him. If he hadn't been too worried about the safety of Xinyan Tantrism and couldn't afford to lose it all, he would never have been beaten to death by Li Yundong's words. As the saying goes, one's ass determines one's head. This was the truth. No matter how smart a person was, there would be times when his brain short-circuited. Moreover, a person's way of thinking and behavior sometimes did not depend on what he wanted to do, but on what he should do in his position. When Kaisai Hikari heard that Li Yundong had promised to take away the Wisdom King's Dharmakaya and not to keep the purple gold Luo Yin in Mount Koya, he really wanted to worship Li Yundong as a living Buddha. He quickly said, "Your Highness, in your opinion, where should the immovable Wisdom King's Dharmakaya be?" Li Yundong said with a smile, "Your Excellency is too modest. This Mount Koya is your Taoist field. You don't know where the Dharmakaya is. How can you ask me?" Kaisai Hikari said with a wry smile, "Your Highness, if we knew where the Dharmakaya was, how could we have been beaten so badly by the mystical silver fox?" Li Yundong asked with a smile, "Your Excellency, let me ask you, what is the Dharmakaya?" Kaisai Hikari was stunned, but he didn't expect that Li Yundong would suddenly ask him why. He had been very Buddhist since he was a child. At the age of 4 he could write. At the age of 6 he could recite 16 Buddhist scriptures. At the age of 8 he was familiar with the classics of Buddhism, Taoism and Confucianism. At the age of 10 he could annotate his own new explanations. He was known as a genius of Xinyan Tantrism that had not been seen in 50 years. If he fought with others he would indeed be unable to defeat many people. But if someone argued with him about Buddhism, Kaisai Hikari knew that he would not lose to anyone in the world. He paused for a moment, then said without hesitation, "Dharmakaya refers to the Dharma of the Buddha, the leakless Dharma of the Buddha, and the Buddha's true self, which is the Tathagata Sutra." His reaction could not be said to be slow, and the answer he gave could not be said to be inaccurate. Although many of the people sitting in the motionless lecture hall were his students and disciples, they were also eminent monks. They knew that the answers given by Kaisai Hikari were concise and comprehensive, and they could not pick out any mistakes. Su Chan came from the Fox Zen school. Although most of the disciples of the Fox Zen school practiced Taoism, the Fox Zen school originated from Buddhism. Although Ao Wushuang did not practice both Buddhism and Taoism, she had read a lot of books about Buddhism and Taoism. Naturally, her disciple Su Chan had also read a lot of Buddhist classics. Of course, she understood what she meant. Although Zhou Qin had entered the Tao late, she had worked hard to catch up and cultivated hard. Her master practiced both Buddhism and Taoism, so she had naturally read a lot of Buddhist classics. Needless to say, Ziyuan and Ruan Hongling were both inner disciples. They had read a lot of poetry and books since they were young, and they had also done a lot of research on Buddhism. Only Lin Miao had become a monk halfway through. In the eyes of foreigners, she was an expert in China, but in the eyes of those who were truly knowledgeable, she was not even half a bucket of water. Kaisai Hikari's words made her eyes widen. She knew what each word meant, but when they were put together, a large number of Buddhist terms appeared. She didn't understand what they meant at all. Lin Miao was a Westerner. She was straightforward and didn't beat around the bush. If she didn't understand, she would immediately ask. She asked Ziyuan in a low voice, "Ziyuan, what does he mean? What is the proper method? What is the leakless method? What is the Tathagata Sutra?" Ziyuan was gentle and broad-minded. She did not reject Lin Miao just because she was a blonde with blue eyes. At this time, seeing that she was eager to learn, she explained in a low voice, "In the Kusha Luan, it is said that in all the realms the flow is continuous, and the leakage is endless, so it is called leakage. The 5 books of Mahayana Sutra says that the flow is endless, and it is like a sore leakage, so it is called leakage. The Dharma Flower Sutra says that the clouds in the cloud leak life and death. Therefore, as the name implies, leakage refers to the leakage of human intentions. The reason why people leak is because the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body and mind are not clean. Because a person's body will constantly leak vitality because of these 4 eyes, ears, nose and tongue. Sometimes people are in a bad mood and their emotions are irritable. They will also consume vitality and leak vitality. This is caused by the impurity of the body and mind. Therefore, the leakless method refers to the pure method of eradicating troubles and dirt. Ruan Hongling, who was standing to one side, also said, "Yes, the leakless body of Taoism is also similar to the leakless theory of Buddhism." Lin Miao was confused. She asked with her eyes straight, "What about the Tathagata Sutra?" Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, "The Tathagata Sutra refers to the Buddha's mind, that is, permanent, wonderful, immovable, circumferential and wonderful as one's mind. Lin Miao couldn't help asking again, then? What is permanent, wonderful, immovable, circumferential, and wonderful as one's mind? Ziyuan went on to say, permanent refers to not going and not coming. Immobility refers to not being born and not being destroyed. Miaoming refers to being silent and always shining. Circumference refers to being perfect and all-encompassing. Miraculous refers to being able to give birth to all kinds of methods and all kinds of wonderful qualities. Lin Miao couldn't help but smile bitterly. She realized that she seemed to have asked more questions. What did it mean to not go and not come? What did it mean to be immortal and not perish? What did it mean to be silent and always shine? She suddenly found that she had entered a vast sea of knowledge and a brand new world. Everything was extremely strange and mysterious. Lin Miao was strong. She didn't feel depressed because of her ignorance. Instead, she became even more excited, as if there was a huge mountain waiting for her to climb in front of her. Li Yundong, who was standing to one side, was not only talking to Kaisei Hikari, but also secretly observing Su Chan, Ziyuan, and the others. Seeing that Lin Miao was eager to learn, he was moved in his heart and then asked, Your Excellency, your explanation is right, but as far as I know, all the Buddhas in the sky have Dharmakaya, and their Dharmakaya is different, so each Buddhist sect has a different understanding of Dharmakaya. I wonder what the Dharmakaya of the Xinyan Tantrism refers to. Gu Ziguanji naturally didn't believe that the reincarnated wisdom king would not know what the Dharmakaya of the various Buddhist sects referred to. Hearing Li Yundong's question, he thought that Li Yundong was testing him, so he said without hesitation, the Dharmakaya of our Xinyan Tantrism refers to the Dharmakaya of earth, water, wind, fire, space, and consciousness. These are the Dharmakaya of the Vairocana. Li Yundong said with a smile, Then I would like to ask your excellency, in the Xinyan Tantrism, where are the Dharmakaya of earth, water, wind, fire, space, and consciousness of Vairocana? Kaisei Hikari's heart skipped a beat, and he suddenly realized something. He immediately prostrated himself on the ground, and his face was full of excitement. Your Highness, the Wisdom King, is shouting at me with great righteousness. It's really like thunder in my ears. It's like a morning bell and evening drum, making me suddenly enlightened. Li Yundong's seemingly casual words were nothing more than an ordinary question in the ears of a careless person. However, in the ears of Kaisei Hikari, it was no different from the sound of nature, allowing him to understand a lot of principles. At the Spiritual Mountain Conference, Mahabrahma offered a golden pineapple flower to Buddha and asked Buddha to preach. However, Sakyamuni Buddha didn't say a word. He just used the pineapple flower to show the public calm and serene. At that time, all the people and gods in the meeting could not understand the meaning of Buddha. Only the eldest disciple of Buddha, the ancestor of Zen, Mahakassapa, understood its meaning. He smiled slightly. Therefore, Sakyamuni gave the flower to Kassapa and told him, I have the eyes of righteousness, the wonderful heart of nirvana, and the subtle dharma. I don't write words and I don't teach outside the sect. I will pass on the method of heart affecting heart to you. After that, all the gods and Buddhas were wondering why this venerable Kassapa understood and why he smiled. Some people asked him, but venerable Kassapa said, I don't know why I smiled. I just saw Buddha smiling, so I smiled. This sentence almost made all the gods and Buddhas vomit blood. It was like a person squatting on the side of the road with his eyebrows slightly frowned and his face deep. This expression immediately attracted the attention of a beautiful woman, so she left behind the rich young master who was pursuing her and turned to pursue the cool man. When the man got along with her, the beautiful woman asked later, What were you thinking that day? Why were you so deep? The man said, I happened to have hemorrhoids that day, and my chrysanthemum was a little painful. This was simply too shocking. But sometimes Buddhism was like this. If you didn't discuss it, others might think of an answer that they thought was correct for a long time, but it might not necessarily be favored. People would just treat it as a fart. But a casual action of a person sometimes made Buddhist cultivators think it was full of deep meaning. Gu Shiguang was so excited that his whole body was trembling. He stood up, put his palms together, and bowed to Li Yunyang, saying, Thank you, Your Highness, for enlightening me. Please come with me. I know where the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King is. As he said this, he turned around and walked out of the motionless lecture hall. The eminent monks in the hall looked at each other, not understanding what the great monk had understood. They all racked their brains in fear and trepidation, thinking, what mysterious Buddhist Dharma is in the reincarnated Wisdom King's words that can make the great monk so excited? None of them could figure it out, but they didn't dare to say that they didn't understand. They were afraid that others would understand it, and they would lose face if they didn't understand it. So they had to follow the great monk respectfully, thinking to themselves as they walked. After walking for a while, they found that they were going to the core forbidden area of Mount Koya, the Okanoin. Suddenly, some monks shouted loudly, "I understand." It turns out that the Dharmakaya is referring to this place. These monks suddenly figured out this truth, and they were all so excited that they couldn't control themselves. Some of them even had tears in their eyes and kowtowed to Li Yunyang. Lin Miao was dumbfounded and asked with a stutter, "What on earth did they understand? Why don't I understand anything?" As she said this, she asked Ruan Hongling guiltily, "What do you understand?" Ruan Hongling shrugged her shoulders, curled her lips, and said with a sarcastic smile, "The only thing I understand is that Li Yunyang probably doesn't know himself, so he's playing riddles with these monks. He just casually said a few words to make these monks fall head over heels. Tut, when this person's status reaches a certain level, others will feel that even his fart is fragrant." Ziyuan glared at her and shouted in a low voice, "Hongling, how can you talk behind someone's back like this?" Ruan Hongling made a face at Ziyuan and said, "Well, I know. I won't speak ill of him behind his back." As she said this, she immediately giggled again and said, "I'll say it face to face." They were talking and laughing behind his back, but at this time, Li Yunyang had already arrived at the forbidden area of Xinyan Tantrism in Mount Koya, the Okanoin. He suppressed the excitement in his heart. When he was about to enter, he heard Tachibana Wakako, who was accompanying him, suddenly ask strangely, "Wisdom King, if you take away the Dharmakaya of earth, water, wind, fire, space and consciousness, what about our Xinyan Tantrism?" This sentence made everyone's heart skip a beat. Li Yundong was even more worried in his heart. There are so many eminent monks here, but none of them can see the mystery, but this naive little girl has revealed the secret of heaven. I really don't know whether to cry or laugh. Chapter 891. Tachibana Wakako's words suddenly made the atmosphere extremely stiff and awkward. Kaisai Hikaryuni was suddenly stunned. He had expected a lot of things before, but now he was completely stunned. "You almost there? Yes, if Li Yundong takes away the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King, what about Xinyan Tantrism?" For a moment, the monks in front of the Okuyuan looked at each other, and the expressions of the monks who had admired Li Yundong before froze. At this time, Tachibana Wakako saw that the atmosphere was strange. She also secretly realized that she seemed to have said something wrong. When she was a little embarrassed and didn't know what to do, she suddenly heard a woman's voice coming from the Okinoyuan. It was elegant and peaceful. "Wakako, are you outside? Who else is out there?" Kaisai Hikaryuni suddenly thought of the consequences of Li Yunyang taking away Wisdom King's Fazhen, but after all, he had said too much before. Now he wanted to go back on his words, but he didn't know what to say. Just when he had no chance to speak, he heard the voice. He immediately bowed slightly and said, "Lord Tsuruko Tachibana, I'm outside. His Highness the Immovable Wisdom King is also with me." Tsuruko Tachibana suddenly exclaimed in the inner room, and then there was a rustling sound of footsteps in the room. After a while, the wooden door was gently opened. It was a beautiful woman in a white kimono. She smiled and nodded to Kaisai Hikaryuni, then looked at Li Yunyang curiously with her beautiful eyes. Then she knelt on the tatami, bowed deeply and said, "Tsuruko Tachibana pays his respects to Wisdom King, Your Highness." His eyes passed over Tsuruko Tachibana and saw Masako Tachibana behind him at a glance. This female expert who had been defeated by him, was obviously a little embarrassed when she saw him again. She was a little evasive, but at this time, seeing that she couldn't avoid it, she stepped forward, knelt on the ground and bent down to say, "Masako Tachibana, the loser, greets Your Highness the Wise King." Li Yundong smiled and returned the salute. At this moment, Tsuruko Tachibana took Tachibana Wakako's hand and asked, "What were you talking about just now? What six-legged bodies?" No matter how stupid Tachibana Wakako was, she knew that she had said something wrong. She was afraid that she had caused trouble. At this time, Li Yunyang smiled calmly and said, "Sister Tsuruko Tachibana, we are talking about the Dharmakaya of the Immovable Wisdom King in this Aoyuan." Tsuruko Tachibana asked curiously, "The Dharmakaya of the Immovable Wisdom King? In the Ao courtyard? Why didn't I know about this?" She lived in this Ao Yuan all year round, but never knew that the Immovable Wisdom King's Dharma body was actually here. Naturally she felt very strange, like a person begging for food every day, but never knew that she was wearing a string of priceless jewels around her neck. Tsuruko Tachibana asked Kaisai Hikaryuni curiously, "Great monk, why is the Wisdom King's Dharmakaya in the Okanoin?" Kaisai Hikaryuni bowed slightly and said, The immovable Wisdom King's Dharmakaya is divided into six-legged bodies, namely earth, water, wind, fire, space and consciousness. At the same time, the Okanoin is located in the hinterland of Mount Koya, where there are small streams running on both sides of the Okanoin, which is in line with the water law. At the same time, the Okanoin is located in the north facing south, and there are dense and exuberant trees on both sides, and only the stone roads on the north and south sides can be passed through by the wind, which is in line with the wind law. And under the Okanoin there is earth fire, which is equivalent to sitting on the stove, which is in line with the fire law. At the same time, although the Okanoin is small, covering an area of only a few hundred meters, the hidden realm of magic power here is infinite, just like the so-called mustard seed contains Mount Sumeru, which is the truth, which is in line with the air law. Finally, the Okanoin has always been the graveyard for the eminent monks and celebrities of the past. The strength of the spiritual force is unparalleled in Japan, which is in line with the knowledge law. Kaisai Hikaryuni spoke with confidence. He pointed at the Okanoin and said, "There is no other place in Mount Koya where the six laws can be combined at the same time except for the Okanoin." At this time, some of the monks who had not understood suddenly understood. They all touched their foreheads with their hands and said, "So that's how it is. So that's what His Highness Wisdom King meant. Thanks to the great monk Masayoshi we can understand." Su-chan blinked a few times and looked at Li Yundong in confusion. She couldn't help but whisper, "Yundong, did you find the Wisdom King's Dharmakaya here last time you came to fight?" Li Yundong chuckled. He reached out and wanted to pinch the little girl's pink nose, but because there were outsiders around, he put his hand down halfway. He winked at the little girl and said in a low voice, "What do you think?" The little girl tilted her head and thought for a moment. "I don't think you know, do you?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "If I knew, why would I have to beat around the bush with this old monk?" Only then did the little girl understand. She looked at Kaisai Hikaryuni hesitantly and said in a low voice, "But, aren't you afraid that they will go back on their word now?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Don't worry. With me here they can't go back on their word." As he said this he walked up and said, "Master Kaisai Hikaryuni is really smart. You can think of the location of the Wisdom King's Dharmakaya so quickly. You deserve to be called the Great Monk." Kaisai Hikaryuni also bowed slightly to Li Yundong and said with an embarrassed expression, "I don't dare." As Sister Tachibana Wakako said, "If His Highness Wisdom King takes away the six laws, what will happen to our Koya Tantrism?" Li Yundong had expected him to say this, so he smiled and said, "May I ask Master Kaisai Hikaryuni, what is law?" Kaisai Hikaryuni was stunned again, and then said, "Law is the extremely immortal truth of all things in the universe. It is cause, virtue, religion, and matter." Li Yundong said with a smile, "May I ask Master what is cause, virtue, religion, and matter?" When everyone heard this, they saw that Li Yundong was asking Kaisai Hikaryuni about Buddhism again. They immediately pricked up their ears, for fear that they would miss a word and miss the true method. This was the reincarnation of Wisdom King preaching. This was the only time in 1,000 years. In the face of the reincarnation of Wisdom King's question, Kaisai Hikaryuni thought very carefully and said, "The saying is cause, which refers to the Buddhist Dharma, that is, the correct relationship of cause and effect. This is the meaning of the so-called origin is the law. The saying is virtue, which refers to ethics and morality, good or bad. The Buddhist Dharma says that all things are in order, and the Dharma realm is constant. It refers to ethics, and there is a saying that if you put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha, it refers to morality, good or bad. The saying is teaching, which refers to the teaching method, that is, the 84,000 methods in the Buddhist Dharma. The last saying is matter, which means that all matter and non-matter are laws." Li Yundong nodded with a smile and said, "Yes, then let me ask you. Am I the reincarnation of Wisdom King?" Kaisai Hikaryuni bowed respectfully and said, "Of course." Li Yundong nodded and said, "Since I am the reincarnation of Wisdom King, what's wrong with me taking away my Fazhen? Since I am the reincarnation of Wisdom King, that is the cause. This Fazhen is here with you and it is the effect. I want to come here to take away the Fazhen, which is cause and effect. And I took away the Fazhen of Wisdom King in order to destroy the mystical silver fox and save your cultivation sects that have been harmed by the mystical silver fox. This is virtue. At the same time, when the Fazhen of Wisdom King was here, you didn't notice it at all. If I want to take it away now, will your 84,000 methods be reduced by one?" When Kaisai Hikaryuni heard this, he was stunned. He faintly felt that something was wrong, and he felt that Li Yundong was being unreasonable. Although his words were very reasonable, after careful consideration, he felt that something was wrong. However, if he wanted to refute, he didn't know where to start. What's more, Li Yundong spoke very quickly, which made him even more confused. At this time, Li Yundong said, "Finally, it is said that everything is material and non-material. If I take away the material and non-material of your Mount Koya, it does seem a little inappropriate. But, Master, I dare to ask you, can those who are calculative become Buddhas? If you don't give up this Fazhen at this time, I'm afraid you will lose more in the future." Hearing this, Kaisai Hikaryuni almost spat out a mouthful of blood. It was like a robber rushing into a temple and robbing the most precious thing in the temple. The monks resisted with all their might, but the robber said plausibly, "Masters, if you are so calculative, how can you become Buddhas in the future? Learn from Sakyamuni." When he saw that the eagle wanted to eat roe, he cut off his roe and fed it to the eagle. Only such a person could become Buddhas. This was simply the most shameless thing in the world. However, Li Yundong's words were righteous and dignified. His face was even more righteous, as if it was about to emit Buddha's light. His face was dignified, solemn and dignified. When Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin and the others saw this, they couldn't help but secretly praise him, but they didn't know whether they were praising Li Yundong's eloquence or his cheekiness, which was rare in the world. The worst thing was that at this time, Tsuruko Tachibana also put his palms together and said with admiration, "As expected of your highness, Wisdom King. Listening to your words is better than reading books for 10 years. If you don't give up, how can you get something?" Kaisai Hikaryuni didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He wished he could grab Tsuruko Tachibana and scold him, "You old woman, did you eat something wrong? You can just say it in your stomach. How can you say it in public?" Unexpectedly at this time, Masako Tachibana also nodded and said, "Yes, your highness, Wisdom King is right." Kaisai Hikaryuni couldn't help but let out a long sigh. His heart was full of tears and he thought that the big thing was over, but his face was full of shame. He said, "Your highness, Wisdom King's words have woken me up. I'll open the way for your highness and lead you to find your Wisdom King's Dharmakaya." Li Yundong looked around, smiled and said, "No need. I can get the Wisdom King's Dharmakaya here." Kaisai Hikaryuni was stunned. "Right here? Your highness, do you need us to protect you?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "This Taoist field is the Taoist field of the immovable Wisdom King. There are laws everywhere. Why do you need protection?" Li Yundong hadn't figured out what the Wisdom King's Dharmakaya was before, but at this time, after talking to Kaisai Hikaryuni, he had already understood it. In front of everyone he smiled slightly and said, "Earth, water, wind, fire, space and consciousness are the 6 bodies of my Wisdom King, so..." Li Yundong raised his hand and said with a smile, "Crack the earth." With a loud bang, Mount Koya trembled violently, and then the earth cracked violently, as if a giant was tearing the earth with all his might, tearing a huge hole. A yellow mist rose from the huge hole and surrounded Li Yundong. Then Li Yundong waved his hand around and said, "Water rises." In an instant, everyone heard the sound of water splashing around them. Countless streams in Mount Koya gathered in one place, like rivers returning to the sea. They rushed to Li Yundong's side and turned into a green water vapor, entangled with the yellow mist, floating and rotating. Li Yundong quickly said, "Fengxing." Everyone immediately heard the whistling sound around them, and gusts of wind came from all directions, like countless sharp blades. But when they rushed in front of Li Yundong, they immediately stopped and turned into a gentle breeze, turning into white smoke, gathering together with the earth chi and water chi from before. At this time, Li Yundong shouted continuously, "Huosheng! Kongxiang!" Everyone saw that in an instant, countless magma and raging fire gushed out of the cracks in the ground, instantly swallowing Li Yundong's whole body. However, Li Yundong remained motionless in the raging fire. He pinched the fundamental seal with both hands, and the golden light around him was bright. Water and fire could not invade him. As soon as the fire chi came into contact with the previous 3 chis, it immediately boiled violently. The 4-colored chis twisted into a ball, like elixirs being refined in a furnace. Then, the 4 streams of spiritual chi became bigger and bigger, and then they soared into the sky like a 4-colored beam of light. With a loud bang they rushed straight into the sky, seeming to poke a huge hole in the sky. The clouds in the middle of the beam of light were rolling and rotating, which was magnificent. A human figure could be vaguely seen in the beam of light. The figure was vague and only a rough outline could be vaguely recognized. At this time, Li Yundong put his hands together again, pinched a handprint and shouted, "Sense gathering." In an instant, Countless ghosts that had been buried in Mount Koya for thousands of years suddenly rushed out of the tombstones and followed the four-colored beam of light up. At first they were all dark and gray ghosts and vengeful spirits, but when they rushed to the sky and then descended, they all turned into golden gods as if they had ascended to become Buddhas. As the undead that had fallen from the sky gathered together one by one, the Fazhen in the beam of light gradually became more and more obvious and clear. When everyone took a closer look, they saw that it was clearly an immovable wisdom king with dark skin and an intelligent sword in his hand. When the last undead gathered on the forehead of the immovable wisdom king, it made up for the black eyeball and the vertical pupil on his forehead. This was like a finishing touch. The eyes of the wisdom king's Fazhen in midair moved. As soon as he lowered his head, a golden light shot out of his eyes and shone straight down. At this moment, there was a huge bang in the sky, and a clear and distant sound of Buddha rang in the ears of countless people. It was like the sound of Buddha's Dharma coming from the distant heaven. The penetrating power was so strong that it seemed to penetrate everyone's soul. At this time, not only were all the people of Xinyan Tantrism stunned, but also the tourists of Mount Koya were stunned. They looked up at the sky in a daze and couldn't help saying, "My God! What's going on?" Chapter 892. The last time Li Yundong came to Mount Koya, he was not a master of thunder retribution. He could not understand the mysteries of the universe. Naturally, he could not achieve the supreme realm of moving heaven and earth with a single thought. Therefore at that time he did not know that the Dharmakaya of wisdom was in the Taoist field of Mount Koya, and even if he understood it, there was nothing he could do. If his cultivation was not high enough, he could not move it away even if he had a mountain of gold. Although he had defeated Masako Tachibana with the power of the immovable wisdom king of Mount Koya in that battle, he could not control this power. He could not achieve the realm of unity of heaven and man himself, so he could not perfectly integrate it with the six bodies. He could only leave this power here, unable to take it away or use it. But now that Li Yundong had understood the mystery of the six bodies, he understood that the Dharmakaya of the immovable wisdom king was composed of the six bodies of wind, water, earth, fire, and space. The six bodies referred to the outer six of Buddhism, that is, everything in the universe. This was secretly in line with the Taoist concept of infinite void, unity of heaven and man. At this time, Li Yundong had a good understanding of both Buddhism and Taoism. After understanding this principle, with a thought, the power that had been gathered in Mount Koya for thousands of years was immediately available for him to use. At this time, the monks on Mount Koya saw the true body of Wisdom King in midair looking down at the people in the desert. His eyebrows were tightly knitted, and a bright red flame was boiling in his majestic eyes. His face was ferocious and angry, and he was majestic. His whole body was blue and cyan. At first he had two arms, one holding the wisdom sword and the other wrapped around the Vajra chain. But after a while, the true body of Wisdom King changed into four arms, each holding the immovable Wisdom King's fundamental seal. From a distance, he was really like an unshakable towering mountain, which made people feel a sense of worship at first sight. The eminent monks of Mount Koya had been seeking Buddha all their lives, not only to spread the Dharma to all living beings, but also to hope that they could ascend to the heaven realm in the future and become one of the gods and Buddhas. Although they were very utilitarian, why did monks eat vegetarian and chant Buddha all day long? If every single one of them was indifferent to fame and fortune, then what was the point of resisting when the other sects attacked them? They could just obediently stretch out their necks and let the other party chop them off. Everyone thought that the people of Buddhism were mostly indifferent to fame and fortune, and that the people of Taoism were modest, peaceful, and aloof from worldly affairs. However, in reality, the competition between Buddhism and Taoism in terms of cultivation, preaching, and profit was extremely fierce. This could be seen in the history of any country, be it the Western Crusades, or the Eastern Taoists and Buddhist Dharmakayas, they could all be seen. A soldier who does not want to be a general is not a good soldier. A monk who does not want to be a deity is not a good monk. Buddha says, life is like a thicket of thorns. Chanting sutras for 1,000 days, praying to Buddha for 10,000 days, for what? Wasn't it all for the sake of meeting the gods and Buddhas and praying that the gods and Buddhas would take him all the way to the Western paradise so that he could be free from the sea of suffering in the human world? However, in front of them, this genuine Buddha had appeared right under their noses. Furthermore, he was the king of all wisdom kings, the immovable wisdom king of all wisdom kings. This really shocked the monks of Mount Koya to the point that they couldn't control themselves. Although the eminent monks accompanying Kaisai Hikaryuni knew that Li Yundong was the reincarnated wisdom king, this reincarnated Wisdom King was just a title. It was as if someone had given them a check with a huge amount of money written on it. However, the monks of Mount Koya were also rich and used to seeing money. Although there was a lot of money, it was just a string of numbers. However, if this mountain of real money was placed in front of them, they could not help but change their expressions. At this time, the eminent monks beside Li Yundong were all prostrating on the ground. They did not dare to look at the real body of Wisdom King in the sky. Those monks who were not qualified to follow him sat cross-legged on the ground and began to recite the Diamond Sutra loudly. At this time, the Buddhist bells, conchas, bowls and bronze statues all over Mount Koya rang at the same time. They made a buzzing sound, which merged with the sound of the Buddhist scriptures and rose into the sky. Could be heard clearly from more than 10 miles away. The tourists who came to Mount Koya to worship Buddha were all stunned at this time. Many people took out their mobile phones to take pictures of this wonder that had not been seen in 100 years, and many devout believers prostrated on the ground and kowtowed. Even Kaisai Hikaryuni, who was a little unwilling in his heart, had to lower his head and recite the Buddhist scriptures devoutly. After the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King in the air showed its majesty, another golden light fell from the sky and shone on the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King and Li Yundong. In an instant, the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King shattered with a bang and turned into countless golden fine powder, scattering in all directions. Some of the monks who were still chanting saw the golden powder floating around, and immediately stood up in excitement. They hopped up and down wanting to grab more of the golden powder. It was as though by doing so, they would be able to absorb a strand of the Akala's aura, and their future cultivation would be higher. When the tourists of Mount Koya saw that these monks were like this, they were even more unwilling to show weakness. For a time, there were people running and jumping everywhere on Mount Koya. The Kangabuji temple was as lively as a big pot full of dumplings. Because of their respected status, Kaisai Hikaryuni and the other monks naturally could not do such a rude thing because of their face. They could only resist the impulse in their hearts and continue chanting in a low voice. Soon, Su-chan looked around in surprise and couldn't help saying, why did the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King disperse? She wanted to ask Li Yundong, but she saw him standing in the golden light. His whole body was shining with golden light, and he was so dignified that he was speechless. For a moment she was afraid and didn't dare to go forward. She pulled Ziyuan's sleeve and whispered, "Sister Ziyuan, what should we do if Yundong's Dharmakaya disappears? If he is caught by these guys, won't he suffer a big loss?" Ziyuan smiled and said in a low voice, "Don't be silly. Let me ask you, what is the unity of heaven and man, what is the infinite void and what is the origin?" Zhang Zhishuan had taught Su-chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin these questions in the hotel. At this time, hearing Ziyuan's words, Su-chan immediately understood. The little girl was smart and intelligent. She didn't understand it before because she cared about it. Now that someone else pointed it out, she immediately understood. The 6 Dharmakaya came from all things in the universe. To put it bluntly, it was the combination of matter and spirit. The first 5, wind, water, earth, and fire, referred to the 4 elements in the universe. Buddhists believed that all the actual matter in the universe was composed of these 4 elements, so there was the saying, the 4 elements are all void. The latter tune void and lawn referred to space and spirit, which were illusory things. Li Yundong's Dharmakaya came from these 6. At this time it was scattered everywhere and it returned to the original universe. This was the infinite void in the Taoist concept, the realm of the unity of heaven and man. Su-chan understood that Li Yundong's Dharmakaya had been branded with his own Jinfa mark, and it was hidden between heaven and earth. Although it couldn't be seen on normal days, if he were to fight with a single thought, the Dharmakaya hidden between heaven and earth would immediately appear. When the little girl saw that Li Yundong had finally obtained his Wisdom King's Dharmakaya, she felt a little happy in her heart. But for some reason, when she looked at Li Yundong, who was shining with golden light and looking solemn, she felt a sense of unfamiliarity and fear. Now, Yundong can be considered a complete immovable Wisdom King, right? However, motionless Wisdom King is the Wisdom King who subdues demons and subdues devils, the great might Wisdom King who frightens evil demons and devils. Will he not recognize me? This was not the first time that this thought had arisen in the little girl's heart. She watched Li Yundong become stronger and stronger, and his identity became more and more sensitive. She felt more and more insecure in her heart. But just as she was feeling anxious, she saw Li Yundong raise his palm in the golden light and shout the name of Buddha, Amitabha. This Buddha's name shook the mountains. The Buddha bell rang loudly, and the loud chanting of sutras of Mount Koya was also forcibly suppressed by him. For a moment, All the monks shut their mouths and looked at Li Yundong's figure or in his direction in horror. Li Yundong lowered his head, and his face seemed to be covered with a layer of shining light. His eyes drooped. After shouting the name of Buddha, he didn't say a word. He didn't speak, and the others didn't dare to speak. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly. In the lobby of the Aoyuan, Tsuruko Tachibana and Masako Tachibana, who had seen the wonderful scene of the Buddha's light descending into the world, couldn't help sighing. Tsuruko Tachibana put his palms together and moved his teeth slightly, as if he was chanting something. Masako Tachibana sighed softly and said, "What a powerful wisdom king. What a profound realm. I didn't lose unjustly." Masako Tachibana knew that with Li Yundong's current realm, even if he was not the reincarnation of Wisdom King, she was no match for him at all. Masako Tachibana knew that she would never be able to reach such a realm in her lifetime. She was an extremely competitive person. Seeing that Li Yundong's cultivation was so profound, her previous thoughts became more and more hot. She waved to Tachibana Wakako, who was looking at Li Yundong with her mouth agape not far away, and said to her, "Wakako, from today on, you must find a way to become Li Yundong's disciple. If you can't learn the true inheritance, you will no longer be the successor of my Tachibana family." At this time, Tachibana Wakako had already been admiring Li Yundong. If Masako Tachibana said it a little more gently, she was afraid that she would immediately bow down to him. As for whether Li Yundong would accept it or not, it was another matter. But Masako Tachibana said it so stiffly and arrogantly. Tachibana Wakako suddenly became rebellious and said angrily, "I don't want it." At this time there was complete silence on Mount Koya. Her words were shouted out loud, which was really clear. At this time, Li Yundong raised his head and smiled at Tachibana Wakako. Being glanced at by Li Yundong, Tachibana Wakako immediately lowered her head and didn't dare to speak again. Although she didn't contradict Masako Tachibana again, no matter how Masako Tachibana winked at her at this time, she refused to raise her head to look at her mother again. Masako Tachibana was furious in her heart. She was used to being the leader of the family. Although she restrained her emotions after the great defeat, she couldn't change her habit of bossing people around. She was about to scold her again, but Li Yundong smiled and said to her, "Sister Masako Tachibana, as the saying goes, a melon that is forcibly twisted is not sweet. Don't force her. If you want to seek Dharma and Tao, in fact, you don't have to go through so much trouble because all the Dharma only asks for it from the heart." As he said this, he smiled, put his palms together, and bowed to Kaisai Hikaryoshi and the eminent monks beside him. He said, "Thank you for your cooperation, masters. I'm busy going back to deal with the mystical silver fox. I'll leave first." Kaisai Hikaryoshi was depressed. "Good heavens, you came without saying hello. When you came, you took away the Wisdom King's Fazhen of Mount Koya. Now you want to leave. Even if you are the reincarnation of Wisdom King, you can't do this, can you?" However, Li Yundong's excuse made him unable to refute it. He could only smile bitterly in his heart, put his palms together, and return the salute to Li Yundong. He watched him take Su Chan and the others down the mountain. It was not until their figures disappeared that he let out a long sigh with a sad face, thinking about how to make up for this loss. As for Masako Tachibana, she stared at her daughter with disappointment. She didn't listen to what Li Yundong had said to her at all. In her opinion, this was just Li Yundong's excuse. All kinds of methods only asked for in the heart. If that was the case, all the teachers in the world should hang themselves. Masako Tachibana frowned and thought quickly, how can I make Li Yundong accept Tachibana Wakako as his disciple? Just as she and Kaisai Hikaryoshi were thinking about it, a novice monk suddenly rushed in from the mountain road. The novice monk was quite young and had never seen anything. When he came in, he almost rolled and crawled. He pointed to the foot of the mountain with a shocked face and said, "Great monk, bad news, bad news." Kaisai Hikaryoshi's face darkened. "What's wrong?" The novice monk said, "At the foot of the mountain, there are many people coming from the foot of the mountain." Kaisai Hikaryoshi was shocked and quickly asked, "What's going on?" The young novice monk said, "I don't know either." "Great monk, go and have a look." Kaisai Hikaryoshi hurriedly rushed out of the dense forest. When he came to the mountainside, he saw that the foot of the mountain was densely packed with people, rushing to the Kangabuji temple. Although these people were fanatical, they were still in order. Many of them brought their families with them, and even their children were brought out. Moreover, all of them kowtowed 3 times and 9 times. Obviously they were all believers. Kaisai Hikaryoshi had been in Mount Koya for many years. Although he had seen a large-scale pilgrimage of believers, He had never seen such a crazy scene. He was stunned for a moment and soon understood that this must be the miracle of Li Yundong. The appearance of the true Buddha had caused the world to go crazy and worship him. In an instant, Kaisai Hikariyoshi thought that after this incident, Xinyan Tantrism would be able to attract countless believers because of this incident and increase the number of devout believers. He suddenly thought of Tsuruko Tachibana's willing to give up words before, and for a moment he sighed in his heart, but he didn't know whether it was sad or happy. Everyone, I've been too busy these days. I can only apologize. Chapter 893. After Li Yunyang obtained the Wisdom King Dharma, he slowly went down from Mount Koya. He passed by the crazy believers on the stone steps, but no one knew that this extremely young and handsome man was the reincarnated Wisdom King who had caused the previous miracle. Soon, these crazy believers had seen the miracle shake heaven and earth before, and Mount Koya seemed to have been torn in half. But when they went up the mountain they found that Mount Koya was intact, and the Okanoin, which was full of tombstones, was still the same as before. It seemed that the earth-shattering scene just now was just an illusion. If it weren't for the fact that many eminent monks in the Okanoin were sitting cross-legged and chanting sutras, they would have thought that they were dreaming. Some people who hadn't seen the miracle in time only thought that it was an earthquake. Japan was a country with high earthquake frequency. Sometimes it was common for several earthquakes to occur in a day. Such a geographical environment had tempered the tough nerves of the Japanese people. After they were nervous for a while, they continued to do what they should do. Only many Japanese cultivation sects soon learned about what had happened to Mount Koya, and they became very nervous. What? The reincarnated Wisdom King took away the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King in Mount Koya? And he performed a miracle? What was going on? Let's go and find out the news and see what happened. Kaisai Hikariuni and the other eminent monks of Mount Koya felt that the Dharmakaya of the immovable Wisdom King Taoist field had been taken away, and they had suffered a great loss. However, they didn't know that the people of other sects felt that Mount Koya had taken advantage of them. The reincarnated Wisdom King had performed a miracle in Mount Koya. This time, Xinyan Tantrism would increase many loyal believers. Moreover, with such a show, if something really happened to Xinyan Tantrism in the future, he would put down his face and ask for help from the reincarnated Wisdom King. He believed that the reincarnated Wisdom King would not sit idly by, would he? Although there were many dirty things between the Chinese and the Japanese, he was the reincarnated Wisdom King. He couldn't just let his Taoist field be trampled on and ignore it, could he? This was just like buying an insurance. The cultivation sects who had some ideas about Xinyan Tantrism had all stopped at this time and no longer had any crooked ideas. Was it a joke? If they went to find trouble with Xinyan Tantrism now, wouldn't they be going against the reincarnation of Wisdom King? If they couldn't get along with the reincarnated Wisdom King, when he was in a bad mood one day, he would visit them with a purple gold luo pan and say with a smile, "I have observed the cultivation world of Japan. Only your sect has a deep foundation and great strength. You can take on the important task of guarding the mystical silver fox." Wouldn't that be terrible? Look at the sects that are responsible for guarding the mystical silver fox. How is the Tiantai sect now? After the sect master was heavily injured, he was at a disadvantage in the battle against the reincarnated Wisdom King and died. The patriarch of the ape family of the Earth Imperial sect Shinto was dead. What if the mystical silver fox that he was guarding died? The cultivators of these sects thought to themselves, "No, the bald donkeys of Mount Koya have bought an insurance for themselves. They can't let the bald donkeys of Mount Koya monopolize the beauty in front of them. They have to buy this kind of insurance themselves." Although there was no Wisdom King's Dharmakaya in his Taoist field, the reincarnated Wisdom King also had to eat, drink, and drink. He would always worry about firewood, rice, oil, salt, soy sauce, vinegar, and tea, right? Even if he didn't worry, he must have his own foundation, right? If there was a foundation, there must be a place where money was needed. The cultivation sects of Japan lacked everything but money. I heard that the reincarnated Wisdom King has opened a tea house in Tianan City? What's it called? Desangxian? The cultivators of various sects in Japan thought about it. They felt that the reincarnated Wisdom King was still a passionate person. Could it be that the Desangxian reflected the scene where the three immortals fought against the celestial fox? A Wisdom King is Wisdom King. He opens a shop and goes to a shop with such foresight. What a good name. Since he opened a tea house in the downtown area, he must want to make a profit. Since he wants to make a profit, we will cater to his preferences. As a result, the cultivators of various sects in Japan, who felt that they were a little bit in danger and also measured the heart of a gentleman with their own eyes, all went straight to Tianan City. Although they reacted quickly, it was already a day later. After Li Yundong obtained the Wisdom King's Dharmakaya in Mount Koya, he returned home and immediately chose to go into seclusion. The most important thing now was to bring Chao Kefi's soul out of the purple gold luo pan immediately. If it was too long, Chao Kefi's soul would be completely integrated with the mystical silver fox. Li Yundong knew that if it weren't for the fact that Chao Kefi's soul had not been completely integrated with the mystical silver fox in the last battle with the mystical silver fox, it would not have been so easy to defeat her. After arriving at home, Li Yundong closed the door, turned around and said to Ziyuan, "You guard me. I'll go into the purple gold luo pan and have a look." However, Ziyuan firmly denied it and said, "No, although you have obtained the Wisdom King's Dharmakaya and your strength is comparable to that of the mystical silver fox, it is only a tie. The victory is still 50-50. There is a 50-50 chance of winning and a 50-50 chance of losing. You can't afford to lose and neither can we." He was not worried about Ziyuan and Zhou Qin, but he was worried about the little girl. She was a little distracted because of the departure of her master, Ao Wushuang. Although it seemed that nothing was wrong now, Li Yundong could see the deep sadness and grief in the little girl's eyes. Time was the best medicine to heal scars. If she lived a peaceful life, the little girl would gradually forget such pain in the future. However, she might have to fight with Ao Wushuang fiercely later. If she fought with Ao Wushuang with such emotions, even if she was slightly distracted during the battle, the consequences would be unimaginable. It was even possible that they would all be wiped out. Ziyuan, who was standing to one side, immediately understood Li Yundong's concern. She winked at Zhou Qin, Ruan Hongling and Lin Miao, and the four of them quietly left the living room and entered the room. Seeing that Ziyuan was so considerate, Li Yundong was secretly grateful in his heart. He nodded to Ziyuan, who was about to enter the door, to show his gratitude. Then he turned his head and said softly to Su Chan, "Chaner, can you not go in with me this time?" She grabbed his arm and shook her head hard. "Yundong, do you know that you are the only one in the world who still calls me Chaner? If you don't take me with you, I won't be able to hear anyone call me Chaner even if I want to." Li Yundong, she was so angry that she didn't even dare to think about it. She looked at Li Yundong and said, "Yundong, do you know that you are the only one in the world who still calls me Chaner? If you don't take me with you, I won't be able to hear anyone call me Chaner." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Silly girl, you make it sound like I won't come back. You really have a crow's mouth. Can't you say something nice?" Su Chan had always been obedient to Li Yundong, but this time she shook her head stubbornly, which was rare. There were tears in the corners of her eyes. She hugged Li Yundong's waist tightly and said foolishly, "I always feel that you are getting stronger and stronger, and you are getting further and further away from me. The last time we fought with the mystical silver fox, if it weren't for the coincidence, I'm afraid we would all have died in a foreign country. Although you have obtained the Wisdom King's Fazhen this time, I am always very uneasy in my heart. I always feel that something bad is going to happen." The little girl raised her head and looked at Li Yundong eagerly. She whispered, "Yundong, can you forgive me for what I did? Let me go with you, okay? If you win, let me share the joy of your victory. If you lose, I will die with you, okay?" Li Yundong covered the little girl's mouth with his hand and pretended to be angry at her. "What nonsense are you talking about? We will all be fine. Nothing will happen to us." Li Yundong knew that Ao Wushuang's departure was a huge blow to Su Chan. Although when she accompanied him to Mount Koya, she looked no different from usual at first glance, it was a forced smile. The little girl who used to smile often and show her beautiful and neat snow-white teeth seemed to have disappeared. The strong uneasiness and great fear made her feel extremely insecure. She wanted to stay by his side every second. If she couldn't see him for a while, she was afraid that she would be restless and even lose her mind. She was afraid that she would be so restless that her soul would leave her body. The little girl pulled away Li Yundong's hand from her mouth and begged softly, "Yundong, I know I have always been a trouble to you, but this time I will definitely not cause you any trouble, okay? Don't leave me alone, okay?" Li Yundong looked at the little girl looking at him with tears in her eyes. Her voice was gentle and her expression was sad. His heart softened. He sighed softly and reached out his hand to touch the little girl's cheek. He said softly, "When did you cause me trouble? Silly girl, those things seem troublesome at the time, but when we go through these ups and downs and look back, those are our best memories, aren't they? I understand what you mean. I won't leave you, but you have to promise me that you will never leave me, understand?" As he said this, Li Yundong looked at Su Chan with incomparable gentleness and said softly, I know you can't live without me, so you are very concerned about my safety. But I also want you to know that I can't live without you. Please take good care of yourself, okay? The little girl looked at Li Yundong and felt warm in her heart. The grief brought about by the loss of her master seemed to be dispelled at this moment. A smile appeared on her face, but tears kept falling from her eyes. Su Chan wiped away her tears and nodded hard with a smile. Well, I will take good care of myself. I won't let you worry about me. Li Yundong and the little girl smiled slightly. They looked at each other and felt extremely warm in their hearts, as if they had drunk a cup of warm honey. Although Zi Yuan, who was sitting quietly in the room, did not deliberately listen to the conversation between Li Yundong and Su Chan, her cultivation was already extremely high. Li Yundong and Su Chan did not deliberately lower their voices, so she could hear what they were saying clearly. He can't live without her and she can't live without him. What about me? Such a thought couldn't help but come to Zi Yuan's mind. For a moment she was lost in thought and unconsciously became a little silly. When Zhou Qin called her, Zi Yuan suddenly woke up. What's wrong? Zi Yuan said with a somewhat unnatural expression. Zhou Qin gave Zi Yuan a meaningful look and said, Master is asking us to go out. We are going to enter the purple gold luo pan. Zi Yuan calmed down and soon recovered her calm and composed appearance. She nodded gently and said, Let's go. As she spoke, they filed out of the room. Li Yundong looked at Ruan Hongling and Lin Miao, then at Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin, saying, Hongling, Lin Miao, your cultivation is not high enough, so don't go in with us. Wait outside. In addition, my powerful magical weapon will stay here to protect you. Go and tell the little foxes not to collide with you and these powerful magical weapons. Lin Miao and Ruan Hongling nodded. After Li Yundong took out his powerful magical weapon, he felt relieved and nodded to Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin. With a flip of his hand, he held the purple gold luo pan in the air and let it slowly float and spin in the air. The four of them immediately moved, and the yang spirit in their bodies came out of the shell and instantly got into the purple gold luo pan. I will return to Su Chan tomorrow, and then update and resume. I'm deeply sorry for the inconvenience I've caused you these days. Chapter 894. The last time Li Yundong had entered the purple gold luo jade plate was during the divine tribulation. At that time all the mountains, rivers in the spirit space had been smashed into pieces, but when he came in again, it was already as good as before. When Li Yundong first entered the spirit space, he was on guard against the mystical silver fox's sneak attack, so he was highly vigilant. But after he came in he found nothing unusual. He was in an extremely wide and vast world. He fixed his eyes on it and saw that in the distance, there was a blue sky that he could not see the end of. Under his feet was a land of rolling mountains. The land was lush with vegetation as if it was in prehistoric times. There were many birds flying in the jungle and the birds were chirping, which was fresh and pleasant. This was the first time that Su Chan and Zhou Qin had come to this spirit space. At first glance, they were shocked by the amazing beauty of the scenery. They saw that the sky was blue without any impurities, like a huge gem, but the mountains and forests under their feet were dazzling, especially the green grassland in the distance. It was flat and green as if water was about to soak out, making people want to gallop on the grassland. They withdrew their gazes and saw that there was a winding river flowing along the foot of the mountain in the mountains under their feet, like a bright necklace hanging on the neck of a girl. A gust of wind blew and the water was sparkling, dazzling and dazzling. For a moment, everyone almost forgot the threat of the mystical silver fox, and they were a little shocked and lost in front of the magnificence of nature. After a while, Zhou Qin sighed softly and said, I didn't expect that there would be such a magical scenery in this powerful magical weapon. It's really incredible. Su Chan's eyes were wide open, and her face showed a strong yearning. She thought to herself, if one day I can spend the rest of my life with Yundong in such a paradise, I won't be ashamed to walk in this world. The little girl's mind flashed with thoughts. She pulled Li Yundong's arm and said softly, Yundong, did you hide in here when you avoided the divine tribulation last time? Li Yundong nodded slightly. Su Chan and Zhou Qin were fascinated by this amazing scenery, and he didn't dare to be careless at all. He released his aura and was alert to the surroundings. He said in a low voice, Yes, but last time this purple gold jade plate was destroyed by the divine tribulation. Su Chan asked curiously, Did the spirit space also collapse? What does it look like? Li Yundong smiled and said, You have to ask Zi Yuan. At that time I had already been struck by heavenly thunder. Only she knows what it was like. Su Chan turned her head to look at Ziyuan. Ziyuan smiled at her and said softly, "I'll tell you when we get back, but I don't think you want to know. That scene was too terrible. I don't want to see it again." Su Chan secretly stuck out her tongue and didn't ask any more questions. She also looked around vigilantly and nervously. But after looking for a while, she found that the spirit space was extremely large and far away. It was frighteningly quiet all around. Except for the sound of the wind, birds, and the sound of the waterfall in the forest, there was no other sound. It didn't seem like there was any danger at all. The little girl asked softly, "Yundong, if the mystical silver fox hides, where will she hide? This lesser kiliacosm is so big, how are we going to find it?" This question could be considered to have hit the nail on the head. Li Yundong was a little worried about this matter in his heart. He had expected that the mystical silver fox might attack him when he had just entered the spirit space. Therefore, as soon as Li Yundong came in, he was highly vigilant and kept the most powerful spiritual energy in Jinchi. But after coming in, he found that nothing had happened, which made him feel as if he had punched the air, which was very uncomfortable. He didn't expect that if the mystical silver fox didn't come to hit him, what should he do? In Li Yundong's impression, how could an arrogant and domineering person like the mystical silver fox not take the initiative to attack? But if she was hiding in this spirit space, it would be very troublesome to find her. When he had been addicted to the burning thumb pot, he had stayed for tens of thousands of years. One burning thumb pot had 3,000 worlds and 80,000 mortal worlds. It seemed that the purple gold jade plate was not much better. If it was like the burning thumb pot, they would search inch by inch. Even if they all became old men and old women, they might not be able to find it. Seeing that Li Yundong was thinking with his head down, Zhou Qi knew that he was in a dilemma. She smiled bitterly and said, "This spirit space is so big. Even if we use the yang spirit to find it, it will take a long time, right?" As she said this, she turned to Ziyuan and said, "Ziyuan, how big is the spirit space in this purple gold jade plate?" Ziyuan also said helplessly, "Do you know the Buddhist saying of Mount Sumeru in a mustard seed?" Mustard seed was the collective name of mustard and chestnut. Buddhists used mustard seed to describe extremely small things, while Sumeru referred to Mount Sumeru, the largest of the 3,000 worlds of Buddhism. There was no mountain in the world that was bigger and taller than this. However, the Buddhists believed that Mount Sumeru could be accommodated in a mustard seed, which coincided with the idea of Taoist cultivators. Taoist cultivators believed that the human body furnace was a small universe, and the world of heaven and earth was a big universe. This small universe could not only be integrated with the big universe, but it could also contain the big universe with the small universe. This was the idea of the unity of heaven and man. Ziyuan's words were to tell Zhou Qin that the purple gold jade plate was as big as the universe. Zhou Qin was shocked when she heard this. She knew that no matter how powerful a cultivator was, even if the yang spirit went out of his body to find a life in the universe, it would be like looking for a needle in the sea. It was completely unreliable. She said, "What should we do? Why don't we split up and look for it?" Li Yundong immediately shook his head and said, "It's useless to shake your head. I have a way." Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin asked at the same time, "What is it?" Li Yundong looked at Ziyuan with a smile and said, "Have you forgotten the 8 great freedoms that I comprehended in the 3,000 small worlds of the burning thumb pot?" Ziyuan suddenly understood. You want to use your avatar to look for it?" Li Yundong nodded with a smile. The 8 great freedoms of Buddhism believed that the avatars of cultivators could be big or small, far or near, few or many. They could change infinitely and turn stone into gold. At this time, Li Yundong had cultivated to the highest level. Although the world was big, his yang spirit avatar could transform into countless incarnations. He was everywhere in the world. Li Yundong said, "That's right, but we have to find a place first. Don't stand in the air all the time. It's very disadvantageous for the enemy to be in the dark while I'm in the light. When I clone later, you must protect me. If the mystical silver fox attacks at this time, you only need to hold her back for a few seconds and my clone can quickly return." Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin nodded one after another. They followed Li Yundong, restrained their auras, lowered their heads and flew toward the dense forest on the ground. The forest in the spirit space was not only dense, but also full of spiritual qi. In addition, Li Yundong and the others carefully hid their auras. Once they got into the mountain range, even the immortal sky eyes couldn't find them. Li Yundong, Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin found an extremely secluded cave. After nodding to Su Chan and the others, he sat down cross-legged. With a thought, the yang spirit immediately came out of its shell. At first there was only one yang spirit avatar, but as soon as it flew out of the cave, it split into two and flew to the left and right sides. The two yang spirits on the left and right sides split into four and flew to the east, south, west and north. Then the four yang spirits split into 8 avatars and flew in 8 directions. In just a short while, countless avatars appeared in the world and flew in all directions of the spirit space. The universe of heaven and earth could be said to be infinite, but human yang spirit could also be infinite. Li Yundong's yang spirit continued to search the spirit space. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin looked around nervously, for fear that the mystical silver fox would suddenly appear at this time and give them a thunderous blow. In the last battle, this incomparably powerful mystical silver fox had left a very deep impression on them. However, they were nervous for a long time until Li Yundong, who was beside them, suddenly woke up from his meditation and opened his eyes, but there was still no trace of the mystical silver fox. Su Chan was the most impatient. As soon as she saw Li Yundong wake up, she immediately asked in a low voice, "How is it? Have you found it?" Li Yunyang shook his head with a puzzled face. "No, my yang spirit doppelgangers have turned into hundreds of millions of people. They have almost searched all over the spirit space, but they still can't find any trace of the mystical silver fox. It's really strange. Where can she hide?" After hearing this, Zhou Qin turned her head and looked at Zi Yuan in confusion. Is it possible that she escaped from this powerful magical weapon by herself? Zi Yuan shook her head and said, "That's impossible. Li Yundong carries this powerful magical weapon with him every day. If the mystical silver fox escapes from it, he can't not feel it. Moreover, if this powerful magical weapon wants to come out, either the owner of the powerful magical weapon will bring this person out, or the yang spirit avatar will be smashed in this spirit space." Hearing this, Zhou Qin and Su Chan looked at each other and asked in unison, "Where is the mystical silver fox?" Li Yundong was also puzzled. They had all watched the mystical silver fox escape into the purple gold luo jade plate, but they didn't know where she had gone in the end. This was really strange. Li Yundong thought for a moment and was a little unwilling to give up. He said, "This time I'll go to the 9th heaven and the 9th earth in this spirit space to look for it. You can help me keep an eye on it." After that, he turned into hundreds of millions of avatars again and went up to the sky and down to the ground. But after a long time, when Li Yundong's countless avatars flew back from all directions, he still found nothing. At this time, Li Yundong was shocked and confused. He couldn't understand where the mystical silver fox had hidden. Was she still in this spirit space? If she was here, why couldn't he find her? If she wasn't here, when did she escape? How did she escape? Where was she now? Thinking of this, Li Yundong felt a headache. There was one more thing at night. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.